Employers of Reddit. What did an interviewee say that immediately made you not want to hire them? Having conducted many interviews for a pretty cushy customer support position plus tech support roles, there's definitely been quite a few gems. Brief examples. Don't call into a Skype interview from your couch while still very clearly in your PJs. Or if you're going to give us an example of a project you headed and successfully deployed, it should actually be your project. The story should not conclude with, I don't know, it was like web stuff. I sent it to it and they handled it a few months later. The one that stands out the most was this dude who applied for a position as a remote retention rep. We were pretty upfront that this was an entry-level contract job, basically just answer customer emails about canceling accounts refunds. But he seemed convinced that he would be able to ascend the ranks to CEO while working remotely from a South American country. We're based in the US. This would have been almost admirable if he wasn't so pushy, had actually read the job description plus a contract terms, and hadn't kept interrupting us while we were mid-question to ask about pay benefits. Despite his pushiness and kind of cocky attitude, we kept going through the interview. Some highlights. We asked for an example of a time that he was confronted with a stressful and difficult issue at work that he was able to resolve. He was unable or unwilling to answer this question and kept giving us generic answers about how it doesn't affect him, and he's great at his job. Eventually, he tells us that he recently had a situation with his wife that was stressful and difficult. He felt that her family was trying to get too involved in his children's lives, and this was apparently causing quite a bit of drama for him, his wife, plus her family. So he forced her to cut contact and move them to another country. Now, we're not going to judge someone's personal life or decisions in an interview, but the approach he demonstrated in this challenge was not good. You can't just walk away from customers in this line of work. You must constantly engage with them to de-escalate and resolve issues. It's literally all the job is, really. So the answer he gave was not appropriate for that, and so many other reasons. Despite this, the interview continued. We asked how he approaches difficult or angry customers, and I quote, "Oh, I absolutely love angry customers," and proceeded to tell us about how he really likes the challenge and feels satisfied when he wins. We asked what he meant. "Oh, when they start apologizing to me." Real talk. CS sucks sometimes. People yell at you because they're angry, not at you, maybe not even at your company, just angry. You can't reason with this, but you need to be able to recognize the situation and force down the bile. Nobody likes angry customers. You might appreciate the challenge of the situation, and it's incredibly gratifying to be able to turn angry folks into happy folks. But turning these encounters into an ego stroke is not the way to happiness. Yet again, we continued. For some background, this guy had a bunch of sales positions and product positions on his resume. Totally overqualified in a lot of ways for what we needed. But this dude was adamant he wanted the job and pretty desperate for one. So we asked about them, then asked for a time. He went above and beyond for one of these customers. He thinks about it for a minute or so and starts rambling about a job that was nowhere on his resume when he was working at a movie theater in high school 15 years ago. No specifics, just a generic overview that he had some good experiences there. He was very clearly not prepared for this pretty common question. There were so many reasons why we said no, but ultimately, his dodginess and inability to provide professional examples of his accomplishments was the number one reason he got nixed. The fact that he kept interrupting and tried to talk over us and just seemed kind of greasy in general did not help in the least. Story 2. Work in a recruiter's office, so I have about 1 million of these. But here are some recent ones. When asked why the dates on his resume do not accurately reflect the years worked at his previous employers, he responded with, "I don't know why you are being so anal. Have a Snicker or something." Followed by about 10 calls back from this gent in about 2 hours in which he argued with us as to why he wasn't given a job and when he would be allowed to re-interview again. Ended up having to tell him to never come back or why he would call the police. After being asked what his attendance record was like, he responded with, "Pretty bad, but I want a job where I can improve on that." After being asked what her greatest accomplishment is so far in her career, she responded with, "I won a case with the labor department with my last employer." Story 3. Had a guy answer one of those describe a time questions with a long tangent about how he and a bunch of guys at his last job falsified time cards for months. And when they finally got caught, he turned the other guys in by telling a supervisor who wasn't his, so he didn't get in trouble. Not sure what he was thinking telling me that. Story 4. I work in recruitment, so I get these a lot from the past week alone. One, for a role that included some community outreach. Do you live in the area? Are you familiar with it? Their response, "Nah, I avoid it like the plague. It is full of criminals, too." For a role paying $22 an hour, which isn't bad at all for the role or where it was, I will need at least $55 an hour. Okay, well, why do you think we would hire you at $55 an hour when we already have over 100 applications at $22 an hour? Because I'm better than everyone else. They really weren't. 3. Why did you get into teaching? Those who can do, those who can't teach 4. The do they substances test comes up quite often. A teacher who had been out of work for around 3 years had secured a second interview and then told me that she would need 2 assistants, one to do all her marking and the other to do all her preparation. Every teacher has to have a criminal records check before they can work. Do you think you could skip the records check and I can just tell you what is on there? Nope. 7. Again, with the criminal records checks, do they check all the way back to X date? Yes, they check your records since birth. Oh, I think I need to leave 8. On a Skype interview, slumming it in a vest and smoking a cigarette, said hello and introduced myself. Asked if he was the correct person. He said that he was. I asked if he was ready for the interview. He said that he was. So I hung up. 9. Guy had obviously cut himself shaving and his neck was bleeding, but he hadn't noticed. Would you like to pop to the bathroom? Your neck seems to be bleeding. Oh, for duck's sake. Why does this always ducking happen to me? Why can't anything just ever ducking go right, etc.? This was for a senior management position. Story 5. I'd ask a question and this guy would ramble for 5 minutes without answering the question. On a later question, he starts with, I'm not abuser, but, needless to say, I didn't contact him again. Story 6. This one didn't quite make it to the interview stage, but I once received a resume from a candidate who listed excellent proofreading in her skills section. Story 7. Not me, but I heard this story from my manager. He was interviewing a girl for a sales clerk position. Everything was going great, and he was really happy with the interview. Then he took her out onto the sales floor to give her a little walkthrough tour and gauge her reaction. See, we work in an adult store. When he got to the back of the store where the adult film, etc. are at, she started talking about how disgusting that is and how she can't believe people do that. And then she just kept talking about it. The manager couldn't even finish the interview. He told his ass manager to finish up and send her home. It's a ducking adult store. At least half of our customers are gay. If you have a ducking problem with homosexuality, don't apply for a job at a damn adult store. Story 8. I was hiring for a position which required nearly constant travel to customer sites, giving training classes and consulting, almost entirely solo and unsupervised. Usually, the job required someone to get materials printed, book their travel, show up on time, and deliver the course or consult. I had the candidate travel to the hotel I was staying at, and I paid for everything, since I was doing the same job and was always traveling. He was supposed to meet me at the hotel lobby at 9 a.m. for the interview. He didn't show up. He wasn't answering his cell phone and didn't respond to text or email. At 9:15, I really started wondering and found out from the hotel that he did check in the night before. I called his room phone and got no answer. Eventually, I left. At like 11:30, I finally got a call from him, sounding very sleepy, groggy. He explained that he set his room heater on high and went to bed and just now woke up. I still met with him after giving him a chance to get a shower and get ready. He asked for an hour, even though I should have just told him to go home. His actual interview was mediocre anyway. He did not get the job, and despite my explaining to him that he failed horribly at one of the most important parts of the job, being responsible and self-reliant, he still wanted to argue about giving him another chance. Story 9. Interviewing a candidate for an intern position, and there was very unique wording with regards to skills, like very adaptable to Microsoft Excel. So we asked for further explanation as to what was meant by that. The candidate then admitted they paid for someone to write their resume and hadn't actually read it. Story 10. A guy came into the pizza place I was working at and asked for an application. After I gave it to him, he leans over on the counter and whispers to me, "Hey, is this a pretty chill place to work? I mean, like, is this a cool place to get high and come to work?" I was completely shocked. I have never heard someone sound so cavalier about substances. Then I take a second and look this guy up and down. He is wearing flip-flops, stained in holy gray sweatpants that are barely hanging onto his dirty, holy skeezy underwear. He was wearing what looked like his little sister's skin-tight red, short sleeve shirt covered in rhinestones, zebra-striped glasses that were held together on one side with pink duct tape, and he had a gnarly mane of blonde dreadlocks with assorted trinkets weaved into his dreads. After eyeballing him with my mouth open for a minute, I calmly told him that we are not hiring and that the next place he applies at, he should not mention substances used. He tried to explain that he was talking about weed and not sketchy substances, but I stopped him and asked him to leave and have a nice day. Story 11. I once interviewed a guy. His CV didn't include a picture, so I didn't know how he looked like. I went to the main reception in a building next to ours where all visitors have to come first. I saw a man standing before the glass door to the reception, so I asked him if I can help him and whom is he looking for. His answer? That is none of your business. It turned out he was the guy I should interview 3 minutes later. It didn't go well for him. Story 12. I've hired computer programmers. The worst thing you can do is when I ask you, why do you want this job, to not have an answer. I don't care if you just tell me I want an honest job where I can make an income to pay my rent. That's fine. That's honest and legitimate, and it's probably the reason I'm there anyway. But isn't an acceptable answer. If I ask you that, you need to be prepared to open your mouth and answer the question. And I've had candidates that fish mouth at me instead of answering the question. I ask a slew of technical questions. If you're not a computer programmer, think of these as the how would you questions about your field of expertise. If you don't know the answer to one of the questions I ask, it's okay to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know." And that's okay, and the next question will be easier to see how you do with that. It really is better for you to tell me you don't know than for you to try to fake it, because I really know the answers to all 200 or so questions on my list. I won't ask them all. The average candidate gets 10 or 20. So if you fake it, I'll know it. I've had plenty of candidates lie about a question and get a question wrong. Getting one wrong isn't a deal killer. Lying is very bad. I had one candidate tell a really bad lie to every question, and I started throwing the easy ones at her, but she still kept lying. So I came away understanding that she was completely incompetent. Immediately after that interview, I told the boss, under no circumstances do I want to work with her, ever. Story 13. Well, I don't steal, and I'll say something if I see someone try to put something in their pocket and not even trying to be slick about it. But yeah, I just kind of tell people that as long as I don't really see them do it, I'm not going to say anything. You know how it is. I confidently used quotation marks. Even though I may be off by a word or two, this was almost exactly what he said. The guy lives in the neighborhood. I've known him a long time, and I guess he looked at me as more of a longtime neighbor than a business owner who takes issue with theft. At the time, he had been working with my competition on the next block. But the owner of that business and I are very friendly and look out for each other. We help each other out as neighbors often do, in several ways. This guy told me with that statement that he condoned theft. Moreover, he let people know that it was okay to steal. From the establishment that was putting money in his pocket by employing him and trusting him, as long as he didn't see it. To me, that's the same as theft. And what happens when his friends walk in and tell him, "Yo, go outside," or "Turn around for a second." What's to say he wouldn't comply? How do people not understand that when the business they work for is losing money, especially as a direct result of their actions, that the business will not be able to continue to afford to pay an extra helping hand, which is what this guy was supposed to be? It seems like common sense, but I guess common sense isn't really that common. Story 14. She never actually made it to the interview process. I was 18 and yes, I was completely in charge of the business, hiring, firing, paying bills, the whole thing. She dropped off the resume, tried pushing through the secure door, was extremely rude and tried refusing to giving me her resume, despite me telling her who I was. She was the friend of an employee and was told to ask for me. If you're going to be that ignorant to somebody you think is just an employee, and only because she seems young, I don't want you around. We dealt with a lot of sensitive information and difficult people. You needed a certain amount of tact. Story 15. Brought his wife to the interview and then asked if she could sit in. And she got upset when I told her that there was a coffee shop on the corner and she could wait there. Story 16. I wanted to ask for my first raise, so I called my dad to ask for advice. Since he's A, my dad, and B, part owner and sales manager of a medium-sized company. I said, I just got married and I can really use the money. He said, keep your personal life out of it. Even if they like you personally, they don't, or at least shouldn't let your personal life interfere with decisions like that. Are you an asset to the company? Do you work harder, better, more efficient? Those are the only questions concerning your raise. Story 17. For a job as a statistical assistant, I would always ask some questions about experience in using the tools that we had in our tech stack. Anytime someone said that they had experience using a tool that was proprietary at our company and definitely not used anywhere else, I just assumed they lied about everything else too. Story 18. I sat in on an interview once. It was for a part-time job at a shoe store. It was going well for him until it came time for the last question. Do you have any questions for us? I was a little confused on what to put on the application under the felony part. I haven't been convicted, but I will be. Should I have put that on there? Also, I can't start until week after next because I have court. Then on another one, the girl scoffed at me and said she had no interest in talking to me if I wasn't the hiring manager. I was really annoyed by it because I was a manager too. I'd actually be her direct manager. My boss hired her despite my hesitation. She worked all of 2 hours into her first shift, called the assistant manager to the stockroom and asked if there was a non-customer service job that she could do because she just really didn't feel like dealing with people. When she was told no, she went outside to smoke and never came back. I made sure to say I told you so every time the boss complained about her. Story 19. I was once interviewing this older lady for a serving position at a fine dining restaurant, and she was pretty unique. She had been in many different countries, spoke different languages, she was very overqualified. She had a lot of interesting jobs, never really been a server before though. She honestly didn't seem like a great fit, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt and gave her a full interview, even though I normally would have just passed after looking at the application. And I got a lot of applications, so this was not being unusual for me to look over it and decide there were better fits for our restaurant and not give an interview. I mean, literally, I could not give an interview to all the applications I got. Well, anyways, at some point in the conversation in the interview process, she said something to me like, you can't not hire me because I'm older, right? And having been a manager for quite some time, of course, I was aware of that, but I also wasn't going to hire someone who would try and intimidate me and question my knowledge of federal workplace laws and talk to me like that. I'd been somewhat intrigued, but that was a deal breaker. Interview over, no thanks. Story 20. I can tell you about a few things that will prevent you from even getting an interview. Being too aggressive. I was hiring and had a girl come in to drop off her resume. I was in my office, but she asked to speak to me, so one of my employees came and got me. This girl handed me her resume and said something to the effect of, "You can see from my resume that I have plenty of experience and am the perfect person for this job. I'll be expecting your call no later than tomorrow unless you have time to interview me right now." I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "No, I'm sorry, I don't." Then, while maintaining eye contact, I put her resume into the shredder. She blinked at me in shock, then put another copy of her resume down for me, saying, "I will hear from you soon," as she walked out the door. That resume went into the shredder too. Also, more than 2 spelling or grammatical errors on your resume, and it goes directly into the garbage or shredder. During an interview, once I had a kid tell me it was boring, so I just stopped going when I asked him why he left his last job. Story 21. It was more what he didn't say. He showed up for his interview, holding a sign that said something like, "I have taken a vow of silence." The interview consisted of him writing everything down on a notepad and passing it over. "Sorry, bud, the position has been filled." Story 22. So I have an interesting story. I work in a retail store and am the manager. 2 days ago, a guy walks in and asks if he can hand in his resume as he is looking for work. I told him to leave it with us. And the second he looks at me properly, he starts hitting on me like he has never seen a woman before in his life. He even asked me to dance with him in the store right then and there to the radio. He asked for my personal phone number and was rather disappointed when I gave him my business card instead. After continuing to beg for it, yes, beg, he did that, I got rather fed up at trying to tell him nicely I was not interested. I asked him if he would like some advice, and he said, "Yeah, sure. Don't hit on the hiring manager." His face went totally white and looked down at my card that I just handed him. He asked if that was me, which I said it was. He kissed my hand and thanked me for my time and left. I laughed so hard, yeah. He did not get a second interview. Story 23. Okay, so maybe not say, perhaps, but I interviewed a guy a couple years ago for a job, and the interview went really well on his part. He knew a couple of people that already worked there, and while they really didn't know him very well, they said he seemed like a nice guy. I really don't know what it was, but something about him really put me off, and I just got this nagging, creepy feeling. So I did something that was maybe not totally legal and looked him up on Facebook. Turns out he was very publicly an ardent supporter of the different groups. Nope, quietly wrote, "Do not hire" in red marker on his application and drew a little swastika and filed it under rejected apps. Story 24. Not me, but a buddy I used to work with. It was at a small, very niche consultancy, and my buddy, when he wasn't on the road, would often bike the 10 miles or so from his house to our office, the entire 30th floor in the center of a major city. One day he's getting on the elevator, still wearing his Lycra, helmet, and bike gear, with a woman who presses the button for 30. My buddy, naturally outgoing and gregarious, asks, "Who are you seeing on 30? She answers, "Listen, biker boy, I have a very important meeting, and I'm not going to discuss it with a messenger." The first part of her job interview was with a VP, and the second was with my buddy, by then changed into a suit, and who would be deciding whether or not to hire in the first place. He still enjoys describing the wave of utter despair that washed over the poor girl as she was shown into his office. Story 25. I was an employee and tasked with collecting information over the phone after they posted an ad. One pig was eating his breakfast in my ear while continuously asking me questions that I didn't have the answer to. "I'll take your name and number and the owner will call you back." Slurp, chew, bite, slurp, sip, chew, chew, swallow. "What does the job pay?" "I don't know, sir. Someone will call you back." Slurp, chew, 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 slurp. "It's okay, you can tell me. How much does the job pay?" "Sir, seriously, I have no idea how much they're offering for the position. I'll have someone call you back." Slurp, 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 belch, swallow, sip, swallow, slurp. "What days will I be working?" "Sir, I have no idea. I have your info, and I'll pass it along." Slurp, belch, swallow, swallow, chew, chew, belch. "Come on, tell me what I'm gonna make." Slams head on desk. He finally got off the phone 20 minutes later. I did write down his information like I said I would, then I threw it away. Story 26. I have an answer from the employee point of view. I was interviewing for a 911 dispatch job. I was answering their questions with the perspective of being a teacher, as that was my previous job. They were very intrigued by me, and it felt very positive. I can't remember what question they asked, but I answered it with a sad story about when I taught middle school and one 7th grade girl poisoned a 7th grade boy because he was gay. I had them eating out of the palm of my hand until I said the boy's name out loud. I saw them visibly deflate. It took me a moment to realize that their prior question had been about how I could keep people's name and information confidential. I did not get that job. Story 27. Not my story, but a friend of mine was interviewing candidates for flight attendant positions. Came to the end of the interview with one woman and asked, "Why do you really want to be a flight attendant?" Woman sighed loudly and said, "I just love pilots." Story 28. Aid. 1-year experience with AutoCAD software, entry-level position. We got 40-plus resumes of people with 15-plus years of experience asking for $45 per hour. Currently being project managers, engineer, architect. One of the OK guys came in to interview November 9th, asked us who we voted for. We didn't call him back. Another guy, after replying to the ad specifically saying 1 year of AutoCAD experience, being told at the time of the interview we would be doing a simple ACAD test to see his proficiency, spends an hour in front of the computer before letting me know he was a little rusty in his AutoCAD. He didn't know he was going to be required to use it. Another guy overhears my boss being a little heated on the phone. Okay, he was yelling flat out. The guy stands up, walks over to me. "Sorry, I can't work in this conditions with that a hole." Walks out. 2 weeks later, he comes by again wondering if we are still hiring. We were. We didn't hire him. Story 29. Worked in an IT company when we were recruiting for a developer role. The applicant was a female, but her husband handled all the phone calls. When she came in for the interview, the husband was with her and was not impressed when he had to let her go alone into the interview. She made it through to the second stage, which was a practical examination. She did the test at home, but we were cautious from the get-go. Noting some concerns in the results, we tried to get her to come in and do the test on site. She was not allowed to come in without her husband. She did not proceed, but the sad thing is that this was a polite and seemingly professional woman who was looking for a job, but her husband ruined it all for her. The main concern wasn't her ability to do the job. It was the fact that we couldn't rely on her to be available to customers because her husband might not allow it. Story 30. You would be amazed at how many people overshare during an interview. I do not want to know about your ex, your discipline problems with your kids, your unpaid child support, or your sex life. Just know. Once, a guy who told me about his past criminal record, which was expunged, so he didn't need to disclose it. The crime was stealing from his place of work. Another one, a woman who showed up at the interview wearing a spaghetti strap camisole with no bra. I have a call center full of college-aged males. Pro tip, always be nice to the receptionist. The first thing I do after an interview is go ask the receptionist how the interviewee acted in the reception area. Story 31. I don't want to be an ex when we are interviewing for an ex. Candidates who get angry are also not likely to get hired. If you don't know something, that's fine, just admit it. Don't tell me that the interview is unfair. Story 32. My very first interview for an employee. I was about 21-ish. The guy asked me if I'd struggle employing somebody older than myself, apparently because of his vast experience and intellect. No, so tell me why you're looking for something new. I fell out with my last boss and he fired me. He didn't get the job, though funnily enough, another guy put on his CV under hobbies and interests. I'm interested in modifying cars and enjoy polishing and working on my cars at the weekend. When asked about it, he said he didn't want to put that because it sounded corny, but his partner told him he should be honest. I was into cars too. He got the job. Story 33. Well, you wouldn't know anything about that. I might be a lowly HR drone and not a software engineering super genius like yourself, but you're not getting the job. You condescending a hole. Interviewees, be polite to everyone. The managers are going to ask opinions from everyone from team members you meet to the receptionist who shows you to the room. A little courtesy goes a long way. Story 34. Not from a hiring position, but thought I'd share this all the same. I was working at a fast food place at the time, so the criteria for being hired in the first place is not super stringent, but this is a gem. While slammed with a dinner rush, in the middle of taking a customer's order, a young guy stormed in, not wearing a shirt, and shouted at me this winning phrase, "Can a ninja get a job?" Note, he didn't say ninja, but I think you can tell what it actually was. Didn't know if I was really allowed to write it. I was dumbfounded, but managed to say, "You kind of answered your own question." Ever since that day, I've genuinely wondered if people like this really truly don't know what is expected of them in this situation, or if they think that they are somehow above the rules of general professionalism while job hunting. Story 35, not me, sorry, but a person I know applied to be the assistant to Senator Bob Smith. She was invited for an interview and her attitude going in was, "I don't want to be just a secretary, but I can take this until I find something better." She gets into the senator's office and his very first question was, "What do you know about Bob Smith?" Well, she didn't know anything substantive about Bob Smith and couldn't come up with a cheap answer either. I know he needs a fantastic assistant. She did not get the job. People, Google some talking points about the person or company you're applying to. Also, there's nothing wrong with being a secretary. Also, again, if a person frequently speaks on national television, their secretary is not just a glorified coffee fetcher or whatever you are picturing. Story 36, interviewee here. I was once asked to describe a situation where you spent an adequate amount of time planning for a large-scale project that was to be completed in an adequate amount of time. What were the results? I froze and couldn't think of anything. So I told the panel about a time that I made a cat in the hat costume mask for a library event about library services available to university students, where Dr. Seuss was the theme of the event. Halfway through my response, my mouth got really dry, and I did one of those audible, nervous, dry mouth swallows and said, "I'm sorry, this is a terrible answer. Can we move on to the next question?" I'm still cringing. Story 37. Got a resume through a recruiter from an older guy who had worked on dozens of engineering projects for the same company for a very long time. None of my colleagues had ever heard of the company, so we Googled it. Turns out it's a company that uses convict labor on public works like construction and paving roads. Not sure what the guy did to go to jail, but based on the timeline of projects on his resume, he was in for over 20 years. So it's fair to assume he did something pretty bad. Called the recruiter up and asked her what she was thinking sending him to us, knowing that our clients require all our employees to pass a 7-year background check. She responded that since he was locked up for over 20 years, a 7-year check would come back clean. We didn't hire the guy, and we don't use that recruiter anymore. Story 38. Whilst telling me about the risks of selling dangerous fireworks, the interviewee announced, "Worst case scenario, I get sacked." The worst case scenario here is that someone gets killed. If it's on Wikipedia, it has to be true. They're not allowed to put up anything that isn't true. Story 39. Not an employer, but I'm a master tech at an import dealer, us. Recommended a lifelong friend for an open position as a detailer. I know he's not the hardest worker and sometimes his priorities aren't correct, but it's only washing cars. He couldn't be worse than the other guys. Should be an easy interview with my recommendation. Just don't say anything dumb and pass your substances test. Detail manager asks him if he smokes. He ducking said yes, told him that he would be able to pass the substances test in a couple days and would stop if he got hired. I've never been so embarrassed, nor have I recommended anyone for a job there since. Story 40. Was on interview panel at work a few times. The position's title was Community Service Officer, but it's basically a student security officer with the campus police. One of the first questions we ask is what you know about what we actually do. It's extremely rare for someone to have no idea what we do because we are super visible on campus. We patrol the streets at night, drive the nighttime shuttle buses, do security details at sporting events, patrol one of the campuses on horseback, etc. To even find the application, you'd have to visit the campus police website or walk into the police building. Guys start saying vague things about how we serve the community and help people. Seemed to think it was something related to charity type stuff. Still amazed as to how he was able to not know what the job was, especially because he seemed like a well-spoken, intelligent guy. Story 41. The organization I work for has a strong attitude towards diversity, so during our cultural interviews, we throw in 1 or 2 questions addressing social issues in our industry to uncover the biases of our potential candidates. On the topic of women in STEM, one candidate concluded that women weren't getting involved in technical fields because the content wasn't pretty enough. When asked to elaborate, he said, well, if you made technical books and lecture slides prettier, like pink or purple, girls would be more likely to pay attention. We continued with the interview, but that gentleman certainly didn't get a call back. Story 42. One Friday, I flew back home from a business trip to Philadelphia. The flight was crapty, running late and crowded, and everyone on board just wanted to get the duck home. But during takeoff prep, some douche in the row opposite me was giving the flight attendants a tough time, refusing to put his laptop away until he finished something, and then his phone rang during the safety demo, and he took the call. First thing Monday morning, I was part of a group interview for a second-round candidate whose resume looked really good. I'm sure you know where this is going. Douche from the plane walks in all friendly and polite. As soon as he left, I wrote an email to the hiring manager explaining what I'd seen on Friday. He didn't get the job. Story 43. Manager at a restaurant for a bit. Interview was for a hostess position. We had a list of questions we were required to ask. One, I think, was along the lines of, why are you interested in working here? Her answers were, she heard it was easy. There wasn't a lot of work and you basically got paid to socialize. I think my jaw dropped. I kept trying to guide her answers to help her out a bit because I'm far too nice, but her answers just kept getting worse. I finally had to tell her she wouldn't be getting the job, and she proceeded to wait in the lobby for a ride glaring at me the whole time. Story 44. I had a guy come in for an engineering PM position. Very entry level, so I wasn't expecting polished resumes or anything like that. We sit down across from each other and we usually start with a small chat about their college experience and whatnot. Then I ask about specific things on his resume. I look down and find that his mission statement has him stating that it is his passion to find work at another company. To be perfectly clear, not the company I was hiring for. I point this out to him, and he just kind of shrugs and says, "We were close enough in the industry and didn't think to change it. Didn't get hired." Story 45. I might be someone. I did not own any clothing that was professional enough for these people, being about 20 years old at the time, and only having worked jobs where my wardrobe was appropriate or even on the side of too dressy. And the recruiter who called me neglected to mention the dress code that they expected for the interview. She told me that I was absolutely perfect for the position and that she would happily give me the job, but, and I quote, I looked way too escorts. And if she hadn't been so impressed by my resume and phone interview, she'd have turned me away at the door. Story 46. I can be a very soft interviewer and have done quite a few over the years. During a particularly bad one a few years ago, a candidate admitted he had messed up a regulatory submission, one of the cardinal sins in our industry. Always looking to give the benefit of the doubt, I asked what the underlying cause was, and he said crap happened. When asked what he'd do differently next time, he just said nothing. This was at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. We ended it fairly quickly after that. Story 47. Had a guy show up for an interview wearing a cowboy hat, a wife beater, and was eating an ice cream cone. Not that that was bad enough. We asked why he left his last job, and he said, "Because you will find out anyway. I rolled a customer's car while racing it." Story 48. Conducting an interview for a cable installation technician. The question I asked was, why did you or are you thinking about leaving your most recent job? Fairly standard interview fare, and usually the answers I would get are along the lines of poor benefits, poor advancement opportunities, not enough hours, ECT. This guy says, and I quote, "I worked at Costco for 8 years, but I was fired for a harassment claim against me. It was total bullcrap though. The chick was an escort. I didn't even go to the second page of the interview questions before letting him know I didn't think he would be a good fit for the position." Story 49. Was hiring for a reception, and one of our standard question is, how do you handle interruptions? She answered that she doesn't like being interrupted. Story 50. You're really nice. I thought you were going to be all like stuck up and everything, but you're not. Broke my heart, but she was not ready for the position. Story 51. I'm very intuitive. So when one of our interviewees said she was sensitive, I immediately saw a red flag. My boss thought she meant ridiculously empathetic type of sensitive, but nope. The type of sensitive where she had a lot of pride and couldn't be given criticism without getting defensive and start blaming it on people. One of our worst employees ever. My boss won't fire her because she's way too forgiving and would rather teach than dismiss. But she's done so much that I want to let her go already. As the assistant director of the company that also handles finances, I call her Expensive Story 52. A colleague and I took a candidate out to lunch for the informal part of the interview. We all looked over our menus and decided what we wanted. The server hadn't made it over yet, so we started chatting about the job. The server comes by after a few minutes and asks what we would like. His response was, "Oh, I don't remember, but I know it was the most expensive item." The colleague and I were immediately put off, but were forced to hire him anyway, due to a lack of applicants. He was as terrible at the job as we anticipated. Story 53. Most recent. My boss and I are meeting a candidate for a third and final time. This is mostly a formality and to get a better feel for the guy. So we all go to lunch together. First, the guy was 15 minutes late. No call, nothing. He rushes in, sits down with us, and proceeds to snap for the waitress. And to cap it off, he ordered not one but 3 scotch and sodas. He'd basically had the job, but since so much of the work isn't directly supervised, we like to see how they are out in public. He failed pretty hard. Story 54. If you start interviewing me as part of the conversation, there is a time for that after any questions. What I mean by this is, okay, Mrs. Jones, I understand you're looking to be put on as an assistant. What's the vacation like? Because I need 3 weeks off a year. Story 55. 3 days ago, I interviewed for a customer service position where 100% of the job is working on the phone and computer. It was a group interview of myself and about 9 other people. The interviewer asked us all, "What is your least favorite piece of technology?" She answered immediately with, "I hate my phone with a passion. Been 16 years and I still can't work the damn thing." Then looks around the room expecting agreement for us. The interviewer told me, while we filled out my hiring paperwork, that she was instantly disqualified for A, her answer, and B, lack of professional language. Story 56. I really can't think of anything that bad being said. But the worst interview I ever conducted involved the interviewee bringing their toddler who ran all over my office, threw things off my desk, and then mid-interview she picked him up, pulled up her shirt and with both boobs exposed started breastfeeding him, which continued for the rest of the interview. I'm all for breastfeeding and I don't think it's anything to be hidden, but not in an interview. I was mortified sitting there. Story 57. I asked the question, Ma, what are some of your short-term goals? Like anything you'd like to accomplish within the next year or so. Her response was, well, first, I want to get my credit situation sorted out. Arguably, this was an honest answer and was a nice goal to have, but discussing credit issues is up there with negative comments about a past position and tardiness in the realm of poor interviewing behaviors. Story 58. Regular. Not me, but a friend, and my friend was not the interviewer, but my friend was working at Domino's. At the time of this story, about a year and a half ago, we had just finished year 12 of high school. One guy we knew from school handed in a resume to Domino's, and my friend had a look at it because he told the manager he knew the guy. His resume was about 3 pages long, with essay-like paragraphs. He also wrote in his resume that he makes a killer banana smoothie and that he survived giving blood once. Story 59. Tell me about your work experience. I ain't never worked before. You're how old? 34. And you've never done anything? Not even babysat or mowed a yard? I watched my cousin's boyfriend's brother's kids before. Anything else? Ever cleaned a house? Ever cleaned your house? No. All right, Chiquita, I don't think you have quite the skill set we're looking for. She ended with, I'm a real good worker. I'll work hard. Sorry. According to your own testimony, you aren't any kind of worker. You really just come across as a scheduling liability. Story 60. Question. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Overly enthusiastic answer. Hell yeah. Thanked him for his time and said we would contact him either way shortly. Had a good laugh with my coworkers after, though. Story 61. This one's more subtle than most here. At my company, we have 2 to 4 skills questions that we always ask for certain positions. This one was for a marketing position, and at the end, after I've answered any of their questions, I always give them the option of either finishing up or learning the answers to the skills question. Out of over 50 interviews I've done, no one has ever said they didn't want to know, except one guy last week. I was pretty surprised and immediately wrote him off. Story 62. Had one guy come in for a construction job, and while filling out an app, he asked, what's the punishment for a no-call, no-show? I couldn't help but laugh. Story 63. I asked a candidate who was proficient at Excel how to add the contents of 2 cells. They said, I never used it for anything that complicated. I asked another candidate who was experienced writing HTML how to bold text. They said, I don't remember right now, but I know it's easy. These simple tests have helped me weed out many applicants. Some candidates lie, but many just have no idea how much they don't know. Both are equally dangerous to the employer. Story 64. When I interview folks, I like to ask a lot of scenario-based questions. One such question involves a coworker getting upset at you about a business-related issue and ask the candidate what they would say or do. One particular interviewee had great skills and experience. However, when I asked him this question, he answered, I would tell him to duck off, complete with the associated vulgar hand gesture. I didn't know what to say, so I just laughed heartily. He didn't get the job. Story 65. I wasn't the interviewer. I was one of the interviewees. We were asked to provide a sample for the substances and alcohol test. The guy before me was taking a while, and he finally came out with a sample and handed it to a confused-looking person who told him to go and sit down. He asked them why they needed a semen sample and what were women meant to give. For some reason, he was told never to come back. Story 66. Had a guy leave a 10-page resume. Fine and dandy. Except the guy said how his former employer was trying to sabotage him after he complained about not being promoted and being age discriminated for the last 4 pages. My VP's wife was a recruiter and interviewed this guy and had to call the police to get him out of her building. Story 67. They didn't make it anywhere close to an interview, but I had someone hand me their resume and cover letter. The first line of the cover letter was, I am seeking employment at insert name of rival local coffee shop here. Then I flipped to the resume and his first skill listed was attention to detail. Story 68. Wasn't so much what they said, as much as it was what she posted on her Facebook page. Her and her BF in wife beaters, posing in front of a pot leaf backdrop with automatic rifles in their hand. She was applying to work with a vulnerable adult. Story 69. Assisting with an interview of a young woman looking to be hired at the sandwich smoothie place I worked at. Boss asked, what do you bring to a team that could help us succeed? She responded by flipping her hair and saying, well, I'm really pretty so I attract a lot of people. Okay, thanks. We will keep your application on file. Story 70. I asked what is one of your biggest accomplishments? The guy replied, well that would probably be this science project I did in school my junior year. Waited till last night, but then just tried real hard and got it done. I asked, what was it? The guy replied, well, I don't know. We got like a C. It was a group project. He was 20 years old. Story 71, staffing manager here. I interviewed someone for a high-paying forklift job in a warehouse. I was filling out his profile on the computer when I asked if the number was his cell phone. He then proceeded to tell me that he doesn't use cell phones because his last job was driving call girls around, and he would get calls all night. I didn't know how to respond, so I asked him if his address was correct. Story 72. Interviewed a recent grad who had had a couple of internships and summer jobs. Asked her what she disliked about any of her internships. She replied that in one of her internships, her boss didn't treat her as an equal, didn't give equal weight to her opinions, and didn't let her come to high-level meetings. Honey, you were an intern, not the CEO. Story 73. I'm highly sought after. I've taken several calls this morning alone. He was applying through a temp agency. And I'm going to tell you a very interesting story. You're going to be amazed. And then proceeded to tell a predictably uninteresting story about how he knows someone high up in our company through several degrees of separation and has had one or two conversations with him. We'll pass, thanks. Story 74. When asked why they wanted to work in this industry, the answer was, why not? They then gave the same answer when asked why they wanted to work for us rather than a competitor. Story 75. Hiring for a call center job, and the girl was, how do I put it nicely, ditzy. I asked the usual questions. Why do you want to work here? What can you offer our company, etc., etc. Then, because I was 99% sure I wasn't hiring her, I asked, if you could be any animal, what would you be and why? Her answer, I like pink butterflies. Story 76. One thing that prevents candidates from even reaching the interview stage is spelling, formatting, / grammatical errors on their CV. You wouldn't believe how many candidates self-describe as detailed-oriented. Story 77. I am not an interviewer, but last year I was interviewed by a group of 3 people for a job I really wanted. I completely stressed myself out and bombed the interview. The highlight was, when asked how I would deal with challenges, I said, keep on keeping on, I guess. They all looked at each other and the interview ended shortly after. And Story 78. Was working as a manager for a team of recruiters at a Christian university. We were interviewing for new A recruiter. She told me that she was applying to the job because she wanted to get out of the strip club game because of the lifestyle. Cool. But definitely not what you should say under the circumstance. Story 79. When interviewing sysadmin type folks, I always ask them something along the lines of this. Okay, worst case scenario. You shell into a production machine for routine maintenance and notice that there is a World of Warcraft server running on it. What do you do? If the answer starts with, well, first I level up my paladin, that's a warning flag to be sure. Story 80. I have references available upon request. I have no references. All my jobs were pretty crappy and I didn't really make friends with anyone at any of my past jobs. The interview I went for on Tuesday wants me to bring a list of references in. Guess I'm not getting the job I'm completely qualified to do, sigh. Story 81. I'm a UK economics graduate, struggling for an entry graduate job and currently working in retail and teaching part-time to get by. If anyone is recruiting, please feel free to get in touch. Strong analysis skills, preference in the financial industry, and seeking positions in London, but willing to relocate. Story 82. In technical interviews, I try to tailor the questions to the skills a candidate explicitly lists on their CV. I make it clear to the candidate, that's why I'm asking about the subject areas I am. Responding to a question with, I guess I shouldn't have put that skill on there, makes me rather unhappy. Story 83. This past summer, interviewing a high school science teacher, and we asked about her technology integration. She said she was excited to put her lectures on PowerPoint and see how the students responded. She would have been teaching a 1-1 tech class and said earlier in the interview she understood what that meant and was excited about it. Story 84. Year 1. I'm pre-med. This isn't a major or a degree, this is a goal. 2. I'm an XYX Greek life. I don't care what it was. None of them are to be taken seriously. Share experiences, not affiliation. Story 85. For a customer service-oriented technology support position, I'd like to be behind the scenes and only come out when there's a really interesting problem to solve. Sorry, Ace. You're not our special wunderkind who only has to work on the cool stuff. Story 86. Not me, but a coworker was interviewing a girl at a job fair today. Coworker. I see you used to work here a year ago. Why did you leave back then? Girl. I was fired for stealing. I can only imagine my friend's face at this point. Story 87. I've never been on the employer side of it, but my boss told me a story of how he interviewed a guy, liked him, checked his Facebook just to see what was on there. His profile picture was him flipping off the camera. Decided not to hire him. Story 88. We asked them, how do you work with people you do not like? The applicant gave a very elegant response until the final sentence. Unless they are French, then I can't work with them. Story 89. Interviewing a cashier for a pizza place that did a lot of phone orders. Ask me, when people give you their credit card numbers, do you get the security code too? Story 90. Has an interview with a guy for a sales position, got to the obligatory question of if he's ever had experience selling anything. His answer was, I do, but it's not exactly, shall we say, legal. Smooth. Recruiters, employers of Reddit. What are some red flags on resumes that you will not hire people if you see? Story 1. I once had an applicant list on his resume that he previously held a particular position with a company. The kicker was this: I was actually the person holding that position at the time, and he was never even employed at that company. He actually ran out of the interview in the building. Story 2. Ridiculous spelling errors. I don't care about an obscure typo or two, but when you spell 10% of the words on your resume wrong, I assume you just don't care about yourself and you're unlikely to care about my company. Story 3. Don't include your parents' alma maters or accomplishments. Don't include anything about your parents. Don't include your favorite clothing brands or stores. Story 4. I hire for entry-level positions in a field related to politics in the US. I'm not sure how useful my perspective is in other fields, but here it goes. Poor formatting. Please demonstrate that you can present information in a way that is easy to follow and somewhat aesthetically pleasing. You don't have to go crazy with color or fancy layouts like you're applying for a graphic design job or something, but everything should be neat and consistent. Use a nice conservative font. Use the entire page to arrange the information in a way your reader can follow easily. Please keep yourself to one page. You'll have plenty of time for the multi-page resume when you're older. Spelling and punctuation. In this particular field, you are basically selling your ability to write. If you can't be bothered to proofread or use proper grammar, why should I think you can do this job? I'll let it go if it's something small that your a-hole brain might gloss over and standard spell check/document search precautions wouldn't pick up, so be sure to search for public versus pubic, form versus from, etc. But consistent or egregious errors, send a resume directly to the circular file. Outright spelling errors are inexcusable. They are ducking underlined on every word processing program I've ever seen. Irrelevant information. I understand some people were not able to have their parents secure cushy internships for them. So this does not mean that you should not list your service jobs or whatever job you held in school to get by. That kind of experience shows character and grit in my book, even though it may not constitute direct, relevant experience in this field. I will offer an example for this one. One kid listed several flashy and prominent internships on his resume, and under each, as a bullet point where one would normally describe their job functions and experience, he wrote, worked in the name of office building of name of organization he worked for. I crap you not, this kid thought that indicating that he worked in the building where his internship was located constituted something that he should list on his resume. Don't do that, or anything like it. Also, I don't care that you know how to use Microsoft Word. Please don't list your knowledge of Microsoft Office Suite on your resume. At this point, it's basically up there with bragging that you know how to read, and most people are not nearly as good with Excel as they say they are. Crafty cover letters. Personally, I barely look at cover letters and am much more concerned with the separate writing sample I usually request. That said, I use them to assess 3 things. 1. Can the applicant write coherently? 2. Does the applicant know how to format a formal business letter? 3. Has the applicant done any homework on the firm at all? My bar is pretty low and still people duck it up. I have seen cover letters with no formal salutation that started with the word hi. I have seen letters that addressed me as Dear Company Name or as Mrs. Livid Jumbo. Pro tip, just use Ms. in professional correspondence with a woman if you don't know her marital status or preference. I have seen letters that did not reference my firm at all. This is to say nothing of the letters I get that are riddled with typos and spelling errors. Again, my standards are similar to a resume. Good grammar, no major or consistent typos, neat formatting, professional language, and relevant information. Basically, all of my red flags come down to an applicant's ability to communicate in written form. A lot of the work in my industry centers on one's ability to communicate well through writing. And if an applicant can't do that, then they are simply not cut out for the field. Story 5. I've been in charge of interviews and hiring on several occasions, and for a few different industries. Throughout all of it, I've had the chance to read some truly terrible resumes. Obviously, my standards won't be universal, but there are several things that will instantly get an application thrown in the trash. 1. Obvious lies or exaggerations. You'd be absolutely astounded by the number of people who think they can hoodwink their way into a job. It's almost as if they assume that hiring managers don't know anything about their own industries, or that applications just need to include the right keywords. Unfortunately for those job seekers, it's pretty damned easy to spot when someone is just throwing sentences together, and it's even more evident when someone has invented accomplishments in order to seem more impressive. 2. typos, or misspellings of any kind. Proofreading is neither difficult nor time-consuming, particularly when spell checkers and online grammar references are so ubiquitous. A person who can't be bothered to spend 30 seconds ensuring that their application is error-free comes across as being either stupid or lazy, and very few employers look on those traits as assets. 3. Idiocy or offensiveness on social media. It may come across as sneaky or distasteful, but life in the internet age comes with the expectation that employers will comb through your online profiles before they make a hiring decision. If someone writes poorly, acts in an offensive way, or gives the impression that they'd be a less than stellar employee, chances are that someone else will receive an offer before they do. 4. The applicant is a bear. Threats of mauling that don't help the hiring process. 5. An obvious form letter. As efficient as it might seem to have cover letter template, applications offered without a personalized introduction tend to get moved to the bottom of the pile. Much like the lies or exaggerations offered in the first point, form letters are incredibly easy to recognize, and they give the impression that a given applicant is more interested in getting hired than actually doing the job. 6. Multiple applications to the same company. Most employers prefer to find the right person for the right position. While there are rare exceptions to this rule, an individual who applies to every role for which they're qualified will seem less interested in those jobs and more intent on landing any job. Keep in mind, hiring managers aren't concerned with applicants' desire for money. They're focused on what a potential employee can contribute. In short, when applying for a job, people would do well to remember that they aren't just submitting a single document for consideration. Their entire work history, their abilities, and even their personality will be taken into account, and all of those things need to be put on display in a person's resume. Story 6. Not a hiring manager, but we had a woman come in applying as a cleaner. I worked for a property management company at the time. Her resume was one of a kind. Under every job she listed, reason for leaving. I crap you not. They included: manager had an off day, wasn't feeling well when he dismissed me. Owner decided to hire his ex-girlfriend into the position. Residual tension after my refusal to serve a very pregnant woman a second wine cooler led to job termination by owner's wife, who was also having difficulty with her marriage at the time. Owner was close friend to my son's father. Job ended shortly after I filed a restraining order. Issue with floor supervisor, refusing to allow a Sudanese immigrant to see the plant nurse, as company policy required that a worker be allowed to attain medical attention in such cases. Did not want to work for a bigot. She then colored the heel of her hand with pen and stamped each page. I wish I was making this up. Story 7. I once did a background screen on a guy who was applying to be a car salesman. He had just got out of jail for stealing a car off the car lot he was a salesman for. The crazy thing is that car sales is such a skeezy industry that this alone was not an instant disqualification. Story 8. I don't know if it's deal breaker, but it's definitely a red flag. If the resume is more than a single page, 2 is iffy, more is unacceptable. Be concise and let very old jobs fall off. We don't need to know that you worked at Walmart when you were 18 when you're applying as a software engineer. I am only a senior technical person who helps vet candidates in a very particular field. What I said was not meant to be general advice for everyone everywhere. Maybe your field does require 18-page resume. I don't ducking know. I just know that if I get a resume that's 8 pages long, I'm only looking at it for pure amusement. Story 9. My sister owns a restaurant and always files funny resumes to show me later. She had one woman who had experience as a night stalker. She wasn't actually Richard Ramirez, but she worked nights stocking shelves at a grocery store. That was a good one. Story 10. I hire graphic designers and animators. If you put Microsoft Word or typing as a relevant skill, don't. It's not a deal breaker, but if you're good, then I'm assuming that using a computer 101 should be assumed. Story 11. I'm not answering your question, but I'm bothered by employers who nitpick resumes and interviews instead of worrying how the applicant will do on the job. Seriously, you wonder why you can't find good people. Had a boss at a restaurant who used to interview all kinds of people and reject them for petty reasons. Sometimes he didn't like them, other times they had criminal records. First of all, the owner got me hired to begin with, and I had applied for the job because I was doing some sort of probation for a felony to get the charges dropped. I'm not a hardcore criminal, by the way. It was for a bad joke on the internet about some former world leader. My employer didn't do a background check or know about this. I was the best worker this guy had there for years. Stole a dime from him or came in late. He would never have hired me if it weren't for me knowing the owner. Gotta be honest, I'm just escorted about the whole job situation in the US. Employers claim they can't find good people, yet are turning many away without a chance for silly reasons. Story 12. I'm not currently a recruiter or HR person, though I worked in a recruiting firm for many years and was the front line in pawing through resumes that might be passed along to clients. Here are my absolute must-not-haves. Poor formatting. I don't mean simply inconsistent spacing in headers. I mean a resume clearly spat into Microsoft Notepad as quickly as possible. Basically, if I'd have to cut and paste this thing into Word and reformat it to make it legible, it's getting deleted. Poor spelling, seriously. If you can't spell detailed, you can't be detailed. Not following clear, obvious instructions in Craigslist or similar sorts of postings, we included simple, clear instructions like, please send your resume as an attachment. In the body of your email, tell us about a time that you handled blah, blah, blah. If they couldn't be bothered to read a relatively short description, they don't get the job. Anyone who doesn't comply gets deleted. Distance. Depending on the position, it can be a consideration. For a low-paying gig, I wouldn't consider someone more than 50 miles away. 5 jobs in 5 years. And you really think I want to hire you to be the 6th job in 5 years? No. Story 13. Reviewed a recent resume for an internship position on my team. The person was the CEO of every company he had ever worked at. He was only 21, so I hooked up the companies. They were his companies, all 7 of them. Story 14. I once received an email application with the subject, your CV, your mung. I had a good laugh with the manager about that. Turns out the lady who sent it was trying to email it to herself. Story 15. I work in advertising, design, technology, comm area. The resume is perfunctory, though I do review it for grammar and doc points if it's longer than 1 page. The real deal is the portfolio. Doing portfolio reviews can be so savage, so brutal, so necessary. Show me proof that you can engage in world-class design for the top companies of the world or GTFO forever. Bad things I've seen in portfolios. Comic Sans, no joke, it's such a stereotype as to be typical now. Work from 2001. Really ugly designs, racist stuff. I reduced her ghetto booty in Photoshop. Someone else's work. My own work. It was fun to bust that guy's chops. Tell me about this project. Who did you work with? Did you visit the client in XYZ city? Oh, what did you think of them? Did you meet Bill? No? That's odd. Because he's the guy at this company that you would work with. How do I know that? Because I built this website and worked for that agency and know that client. See, here's his number in my phone. Should we text him and say hi? Story 16. Before you put something like excellent communication skills on your resume, ask yourself what that really means. I would expect a person with excellent communication skills to be an exceptional writer and to respond quickly when I call or email. So far, it's usually meant that a person can't string a sentence together. I've received cover letters that said things like, I want to get this internship to prove everyone wrong who said I'd never get it. Also, once when I asked someone a question via email, they replied that if I read their resume, then I'd see the answer was XYZ. Sorry, I can't be bothered to deal with people who are rude before I even meet them. Story 17. I interview for quality assurance positions. There are things that are red flags for other people that aren't for me. A large number of jobs in a short period of time isn't unusual when all you get are contract positions. What I don't want to see is a long list of certificates for courses you completed online. Show me your actual accomplishments and not a piece of paper for an online course that I have no idea how legitimate it is or isn't. If you really want to brag about them, we'll give you time during the interview. Story 18. A few months ago, when I was interning, a hiring manager had me help comb through internship resumes for the summer position. He would hand me the ones that he thought would be higher on the list to see what I thought. I would occasionally chuckle and toss one my way. Something from the worst, I remember Chipotle addict. I love Chipotle. Really into the new party music fad. Have 2 dogs, name of dog 1, and name of dog 2, and 1 cat named name of cat. Have never been late for a shift. Didn't provide any work experience. Can't and won't take my eyes off the prize. I wasn't entirely sure what the prize was. Kind of amazed me what soon-to-be college grads would put on a professional resume. More amazed that 50% of them had an About Me section longer than anything else. Story 19. My question is this, for those of you who do not hire people on the job less than a year or have had several positions over the course of time. My aunt was in need of surgery for a condition that left her debilitated. In order to pay for that surgery, she worked. She was upfront with her employers. Never deceived them. However, her health would get worse and worse, and she was only ever able to keep a job for 6 to 9 months at a time. She has since had that surgery and has been medically cleared to return the workforce. She has 0 issues. How does she even begin to explain this to a prospective employer on a resume? How does she explain the time out of the workforce spent recovering? Should this be put in her cover letter? Story 20. Not a recruiter by profession, but being in it, have done a lot of technical interviews. I'm usually okay with a resume as long as it is easy to understand and written in an orderly manner. After that, it's all about how the person does in the interview. At least in it, It's more about your skills and experiences than how good you are at writing resumes. Trust me, I've come across some great problem solvers and developers who are not so great at conversational or written English. But I gladly selected them because they were great at what was required, i.e. writing code. Story 21, aquatics director in the summer. So I get a lot of high school and college-aged kids applying for summer jobs. One girl who I didn't hire always stands out as she came in for her interview wearing 6-point heels and a dress that was tighter and shorter than things I see at the clubs in Vegas. She was 18 and couldn't hold a conversation. Please dress appropriately for your interview. Story 22, HR manager here. I will never ever hire people who badmouth the company they previously worked for on their CV. I don't care if they worked for Goldman Sachs or Disney, you just don't do that. If your reason for leaving is dissatisfaction with the job, fine, but don't go into detail about how horrible your micromanaging supervisor was at your job 4 years ago. I see this all too often. I hear this during interviews as well. If I look sympathetic and understanding of your horrible situation at your previous job, it's because I'm trained to look like that, and I'm happy I dodged a bullet. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh God, another complainer. What rejection email should I send him? Story 23. I did an internship on the HR department of a large hotel chain. One of my tasks as an intern was to select the nice-looking CVs from the ones that looked bad. I'd look for CTAVs that were nearly organized, clearly designed, and just neat and nice. All the others I had to bin. I normally didn't know what function the people were applying for. The amount of bullcrap people put on their CV, though. There was one woman who put a baby picture of herself on her CV. No idea why. Ever got to ask, because I had to bin her CV. Story 24. With the exception of entry-level hires, a bunch of short-term employment. If I see someone moving jobs every 8 to 12 months, I'm not going to bother because they are either a serial job hopper or have major issues that keep them from keeping a job. Story 25. Friend of mine in a small town worked at a laundry. She managed the small place and they needed someone to work part-time as well after someone left that position. She got an application for someone who listed under criminal activity that they had a deuce sheet for substances. They laughed and filed it away with their funny one. Story 26. For the love of God, elaborate your achievements. Don't write crap like worked great in team environment. That crap is generic. Tell me more. Tell me how you worked well. What did you achieve? Story 27. Sorry if it's not the answer you're looking for, but there really aren't any specific red flags. I typically bring in people whose resumes show the type of experience and skill set that are the closest to what I'm looking for. After that point, it's just a matter of how sociable, intelligent, fast-thinking, etc. the person is in their interview. Story 28. I'm a manager at a restaurant, so I hire entry-level employees a lot. Lots of spelling errors, lots of stupid emails, etc. But you skim over those things. What makes me think twice is really odd hobbies or skills. There's usually stuff like reading mystery novels, modeling, etc. when applying to be a dishwasher. My absolute favorite was can lift 58 DEALBREAKER. Your ability to lift a certain amount is definitely a necessity for my line of work. It was just a really specific number. Story 29. Had a guy list World of Warcraft raid leader under his skills. A while later, I started playing the game and ended up leading raids and running a guild. I might hire him now. Story 30. Too many jobs in too short of a span. That's the big one. If I see someone switching jobs once or twice a year, I don't go any further, no matter how good they look on paper. Had one guy link his blog. I don't know why, but I gotta admit, it's a great way to weed people out when their blogs talk about their admiration for Tucker Max. Story 31. Reading some of these posts, damn, hope I never lose my job. I see you have a 2-day gap in employment 15 years ago. What the hell is wrong with you? You actually think I'll hire you? As a healthcare professional, I wonder if there's actually any evidence of these methods actually mattering in the long run. Like a study looking at carefully picked applications versus randomly picking people. Story 32. Bible quote at the very top of the resume. I respect everyone's right to their own beliefs, but you are not applying for a job as a minister. Heard one from a friend that they asked someone why they left their former position at an online dating company. They allowed gays to use their site. I was not okay with that. All right, good to know. Next, story 33. I've posted this one a couple times, but it's still my favorite to this day. The guy started his cover letter with, "Greetings in the name of the Almighty Jehovah God." Don't write this. In fact, keep religion out of your CV or I will consider you to be radical about it. A CV is a list of skills and achievements. Story 34. Former military, not me, but my friend who recruits was told by his boss to disregard ex-military applicants. It's illegal and ducked up and really common. Story 35. Applicant and their friend combined CVs and wanted one of them to get paid legally while the friend would also work there but get paid under the table. Also lied about not possessing a criminal record. Story 36. My brother is in it, recruitment. A guy put on his CV 2 top-level World of Warcraft characters shows I have good determination. No, it doesn't. Story 37. Is it a res flag for an applicant to have 5 to 6 years of no work due to illness? I'm terrified when I can finally go back to work that I'll have no references anymore, and a huge gap in my CV. Story 38. If you are young, just getting out of college, or only have a few years of experience, keep your resume 1 page. I never look at resumes that are 2 pages or, God forbid, longer for beginner position. Story 39. At my most recent old job, I helped look over the applications a couple of times, and one girl put full-time mommy under the current or most recent employer field. Please don't do that. Hiring managers of Reddit, what's the most inconsequential reason you have ever disregarded an applicant? Story 1. Walked into office and said, "Oh wow, this she's for real. You got like a tie and Arathang dog. How will I end up here?" Cue maniacal laughter. I shook his hand and replied, "I have no clue. Let's get started." Story 2. Stupid email addresses. Seriously, people, if you're looking for a job, just make a new professional Gmail account with your name. It's not like it costs you anything and you will be taken far more seriously. I'm just going to toss your resume in the garbage. Story 3. Not me, but my HR professor told me about one of his bosses who, when receiving a stack resumes for a position for the first time, immediately took half of the pile and threw them into the trash. He told my professor that he only hires people who are lucky. Story 4. Okay, this isn't me, but back when my sister was doing her master's in psych, she interned with the police force. She worked with the main psychological evaluator or something to screen applicants before hiring. She said that they turned down someone because he wore a Star Wars tie. They asked why he wore it, and he said his young son gave it to him for his birthday. They considered him wearing the tie as unstable. What? Why? Can someone explain this? I can just imagine this guy wanting to help his community by being a police officer, excited about going to his interview screening, and wearing his favorite tie that his son gave him was his undoing. Kinda sucks. Story 5. Pro tip. Be courteous and professional with everyone in or around the building. My girlfriend used to be an office specialist who greeted and seated every applicant before their interview. Part of her duties was to evaluate applicants' appearance and behavior and report to the manager-interviewer. The interviews were almost a formality. Your fate was pretty much decided by the notes she jotted on your paperwork while you waited to be called in. Story 6. I'm not technically a hiring manager, but I'm an attorney at a large, highly regarded law firm. It's pretty hard to get hired at my firm, even more so in this awful economy. Usually, I will interview applicants and occasionally get resumes from job seekers. As a rule, I avoid dinging people over gotcha BS like minor typos and the like. When people are applying to hundreds of jobs and dealing with hundreds of people, they are bound to make a mistake at some point because they're human, not spell check robots. To me, that's like rejecting a perfectly nice and good-looking girl because she ate the salad with the entree fork. It strikes me as sadistic and inane, but more importantly, I haven't seen any correlation between stuff like that and job performance. When we start losing motions and cases over typos, then I'll start caring about finding them in cover letters. I also really don't care about references because these will be cherry-picked by the applicant. It would be more informative to talk to someone who didn't get along with the applicant, but no one is going to list them as a reference, are they? When I screen or interview a candidate, I look at their substantive work experience, their writing sample, and see if they are reasonably personable during the interview, and that is about it. By and large, the people I've recommended we hire have gone on to have productive careers at the firm. At the end of the day, having the basic qualifications to do the job and the ability to function in a team are more determinative of job success than what their personal email address is, or whether they used an emoticon in a thank you email. I think hiring managers focus on minutia because they have no idea how to actually evaluate an applicant. So they look for arbitrary details to reject people to make their job easier, feel important, and to give the appearance of adding value to the firm. Story 7. One of my friends had to conduct telephone rounds for a position. It was technical, and the person's answering style was like he reads it from a textbook. That person couldn't get answers to any of situation-based questions too. So finally, my friend asked him to explain subnetting after opening Wikipedia. His answer was the first 2 lines from Wikipedia. Then my friend asked him to explain a little bit in detail. Then comes the next 2 lines from Wikipedia. That's just wrong. Story 8. Google released an internal study a while ago that showed 0 correlation between how well someone did in the interview and job performance. HR people seem to think they are acting in the realm of science, but it's pretty rare for them to quote any studies. Story 9. Inconsequential. The file name of the resume. When you upload your resume to most systems, they do not rename the document. If it was called Mama Pepper's First Draft DocX, that is exactly what the hiring manager will see first, because they must click on it to open it. Another common one is Resume Doc, which means when I download 30 resumes all at once, guess what I've got? A directory full of resume 1.doc, resume 2.doc, etc. Every one of those applicants lose a bit in my book when I am forced to rename their resume so I can easily find them later. Also, always upload in .doc, .docx, or PDF, preferably PDF since it is the only one, almost, guaranteed to come out properly on the other side. Doc/docx can lose formatting, especially if you used odd fonts or other such things. Story 10. Oh, I miss hiring so much. Digging through stacks of bad resumes and conducting awkward interviews was so much fun. I screened for mostly administrative support /HR position. Not one of the following people was hired. The guy who put a poor quality, red eye, obviously cropped from a group photo into his PDF resume, and then started his profile section with Christian father of 3, the lady with the email address, Witchy Lover 69 domain, the lady who mistyped her email on her resume so it bounced back, and her phone was disconnected. The guy who started his cover letter with, as a former manager, I am looking for a lower status position where I can just relax, and then continued with a 7-page resume going back to 1975 with his doctorate degree, research stuff, publications, and zero relevant admin experience. The guy who applied for a front desk reception position, but listed all of his art showings and music endeavors, including the vulgar name of his self-produced album, Don't Crap on My Parade and Tell Me It's Raining. The lady who declined a second interview and told me she was fed up with Austin and was moving back to California, and then called back 2 days later to say she changed her mind and wanted to interview after all. Any of the candidates who have music playing for incoming calls. I am calling to offer a professional opportunity. I am very displeased when your cell provider's message says, please enjoy the following music while we ring your party. And then it plays bass-heavy rap or something vulgar like Sexy Times music. Story 11. Wasn't my job exactly, but in the previous company I worked for, I helped the HR guy go through applications because he was getting swamped. One guy decided to put his photo on his CV. Fair enough, it's not exactly frowned upon. The only problem was that it was a picture of him with both hands wrapped around his girlfriend, taken from one of those Japanese Purakura photo booths. Yeah, nah, sorry, mate. Story 12. A photo on their resume that showed them at a party. It was close cropped and in B&W looked bad. In color it looked worse. They went in the bin. Others I've discounted. Obnoxious resumes, such as inconsistent fonts, means, colors, and layout, etc. If you cannot format your resume, then you're not going to go well at an office job with that as one of your daily tasks. Wrong business name on the application. Spelling it wrong or just recycling cover letters without proofing. Using text speak or slang when writing. God damn it, people, use English. I'm not a total a-hole, but reading through 200 resumes for one position means I'm going to be ruthless. Badly articulated resumes are one of the main reasons good people don't get jobs. Make your resume succinct, use proper grammar, and get it proofread by someone outside your field. Story 13. I did a lot of interviewing at my last job. Round 1 was submit an online test. A lot of people got top marks when we had only a few positions at this stage. It helps to have either an awesome name, a name different to other employees so I don't get you mixed up or be called Tom. We had 4 Toms, it was kind of a thing. 2, phone interview. Don't sound like you're reading from a script. I know a lot of people don't like using the phone, but if it sounds like you're eager and confident, I couldn't care too much what answers you give to my questions at this point. 3, next in-store interview, I ask a few business questions. Here's set things I'm looking for you to say. I want you to say if you need help, you'll ask. I want you to say you prioritize customers always and are always on their side. I want you to have an interest in what we do. Primarily, I want to get to know you to see if you'll fit in well, are a good person. If I ask what interests you, don't brown nose and say how much you love working hard, yada yada. Bonus beard round. Clean and washed, neatly trimmed, minimal neck beard. Patchy is bad if you can't grow one. Have patience, your time will come. No odd colors. And finally, I love a good beard, but we're a customer-facing store. Unless you're applying to work in the back, sorry, but we gotta keep it shorter. Story 14. I have 2. One application I saw had an email address that said Swalsbagger with some numbers after it. Not gonna waste my time with that. The second one was during his actual interview. I could tell this other guy was a bit different, but he was dressed really nice, almost too nice. At the end of the interview, he told me I might want to consider getting a new shirt and tie. Yeah, tell the hiring manager to get better clothes. That will land you the job for sure. Story 15. A name. I'd never met her in person, but in an industry where you're surrounded by people constantly, I refused to order a name tag for Muffin. I've also had Sax, Two-Step, and Spidey on my desk as legal names. Sorry, no mass. I feel bad because most of the time you can't control it. Two-Step was a legal name change. But I'm not going to have my entire department brand represented by people whose names sound like inside jokes. Ethnic or cultural names? No problem. People from all over the world that work for us. Muffin? No thanks. Call someone else. That's why you shouldn't be able to name your kid ridiculous crap. I'm not going to take that application seriously beyond the first line. Story 16. Years prior to getting into a position to hire people, I had applied for an internal promotion to supervisor. This was my first big interview, where there were 3 people on the other side of the table from me, asking questions. Internal first thought was, yikes. Successful applicant would be announced later that week. Later that day, I told a very savvy friend how I was consumed with wondering how I'd done in the interview. Wise friend said, "Did you like the people who interviewed you?" I thought for a minute on each, then said a very firm, "Why, yes, I did." He said, "Then they probably liked you, too." I did get that job, and for the rest of my life, I found this to be true, whether interviewing or being interviewed. If you sincerely like the person who interviews you, most likely you will have the job because they liked you too. I'm not sure why this is. I assume it might be something related to the fact that many jobs are looking for a team player or something similar. Story 17. I tried to be as blind as I can to most of the items listed here because I believe in hidden value of people. I can overlook 1 or even 2 misspelled words if they appear to be fat finger mistakes, which look similar to the correct spelling. I refuse to go out and look at someone's social network. I'm hiring the professional side of them and not their off-the-clock side. Don't get me wrong, I see nothing wrong with doing it from a business aspect, but I personally do not want to let anything they do off the clock to influence my decision. The only thing that gets my goat are people who cut me off, interrupt me. It's rude and disrespectful and shows you don't value what the person talking is saying. I also will toss you in the trash bin if you have a booger hanging out of your nose or the white toothpaste in the corner of your mouth. Or you don't have big titties. Story 18. At my previous job, my boss specifically instructed me to never hire a black person. His words, "Bring them in for interviews, but I don't care if they are Harvard graduates, don't hire them." I brought in a group of people to interview once, and there was a black woman interviewing. A few days later, she calls to ask if we made a decision, and I informed her we did. She made a note about that there were no black people working there. She filed a complaint, and my boss came running into my office saying, "You need to hire 1 black person, now." Also, University of Phoenix graduates don't get called in unless they have a good work history. Story 19. I did first-round hiring when I worked at Best Buy, and while Best Buy isn't a professional environment, at least show up to your interview in dress pants and a button-up shirt. Shorts, jeans, t-shirts, polos are a bad start. Also not proofing your resume. On the flip side, I gave a guy an extra chance because he had a funny voicemail. Then when I talked to him, he didn't say, "I want to work there because I like movies and stuff." Story 20. I was the grad student representative on a business school dean search committee. One highly qualified candidate didn't deem it worth his time to greet me upon entering for his interview. He made a beeline for each and every professor in the room, shook their hands, and was very political. He was terse with his answer to my question in the interview, but once again, political with all others. Naturally, the professors had a good impression. I came back with a veto and got him axed. The reasoning was that our business college had 6,000 students and was teaching-oriented. He held obvious disdain for students and preferred research. I exploited that fact to build the initial 2 profs who supported me into a majority, and his ass got cut from the first round. He probably never even guessed that the stupid little peon in the room led a reenactment of 12 Angry Men. Story 21. Not a hiring manager, but figured I'd share my story. I interviewed for the job I'm in now twice, and both times it was with the 4 governing managers of the department and the CIO. All governing managers were quite pleased with my knowledge and experience, and by the end of the second interview, we were chatting like old mates. But after I left, I got a phone call from one of the managers giving me a heads up. He wanted to hire me on, but the CEO said that he didn't like me wearing earrings. Said that a man who wears earrings isn't a man, he is a pussy. I came in the next day without my earrings, and the manager had me sign the hiring paperwork and walk it into the CEO's office. Dude is a complete banana hole, but he hired me. Said I could stay as long as I left off the jewelry. Story 22. Not a hiring manager, but an application sorter. Don't let someone else, your girlfriend, fill out your application. I will know. Your signature font doesn't even slightly resemble your printing font. The numbers that are printed are entirely different fonts, and the pen pressure is different. If you can't bother to fill out your own application, you probably aren't motivated enough and probably can't follow directions very well. And asking me to use my pen to fill out the application you just asked me for while sitting at my table. Good way to go to the reject pile. Be prepared, bring your own pen, or come back later with the application filled out. Story 23. Not an inconsequential trait, but I really want to remind you all about this. Remember to leave you contact info on the job application, or else even if they want to hire you, they can't. Also, make sure it is correct. I have heard of a guy who was perfect for the job but didn't get it because he didn't leave a contact number, email, or anything of the sort. Also, one of my friends put in the wrong phone number in his job application. Lucky for him, his uncle works in the same company. Story 24. Using foul language whilst talking to me when they were a customer. They didn't curse at me. They just used the word duck as a conversational tick. Smoking in the area just outside my shop, in the yard that is part of the area I pay for. Not being able to hold an intelligent conversation with me. Claiming you have passed an industry standard qualification and yet you don't know how to answer some basic questions on the subject. He actually had passed the qualification, but the qualification is worth jack crap when you want to actually get a job. People pay a lot of money for useless training. Story 25. I was working at a coffee shop and a really weird guy handed us an application. We glanced at it and saw that in his work experience he had listed that he worked for our coffee shop in 2010. Most of us had been there since 2010 and he definitely never worked there. Needless to say, he did not get hired. Story 26. I've never disregarded someone based on something small and surface, but the small things do raise red flags that I use the interview to try to address. Except the guy that sent me 20 follow-up emails after we extended the offer. He had gotten it into his head that I was a micromanager. I'm the exact opposite. And his last email asked, if you stop hearing my typing, are you going to assume I'm not working? My last email rescinded the offer, but I don't consider that a surface thing. In my mind, that's ducking, failing the airplane test, and bad manners. Story 27. I had a woman. Her last name was Rouse. I called her house and asked for Mrs. Rouse, pronounced like house, but who answered was her spouse. He said, please hold on a minute while I get Mrs. Rouse, again pronounced like house. We scheduled the interview for the following week. She came into the office and I said, hello, Mrs. Rouse, again pronounced like house, the same way as did her spouse. And the first thing she said to me, it's pronounced Rose, Rose. That was the day, I'm sorry to say, I denied employment to Mrs. Rose. Story 28. One for being too much of a damn hippie. Dude mentioned his foundation and center being strong and loving too much. One for bad fingernail polish. Too many for not showing up. One for being like 3 minutes late to their interview. Story 29. We would keep applications on file for 1 year, and last holiday I went through hundreds of applications. I looked for reasons to skip each application, written in pencil, scribbling, having someone else write it for you, listing me as who referred you, being fired, unexplained gaps in employment, leaving a job for another which they were not employed at 6 months later, leaving fields blank. Weed out the obvious bad applications, 99% of them. Interview the applicants that could figure out how to fill out an application. Story 30. My dad does a significant amount of hiring. He recommends when submitting a resume with a cover letter, try not to start with to whom it may concern. If you can, find out who is in charge of the hiring process and address it to them. You'd be surprised how much of an impression this can make, as it shows you took the additional time rather than simply changing the company name on each cover letter. Story 31. Do not send a resume application on company letterhead stationery to include postage. Sending from a company fax machine is also out. It says a lot about your use of company resources for personal reasons. Ensure you can address anything you put on your resume application. I once interviewed a person for a managerial position who had listed several examples of successful profit and loss experience. I pointed one out and remarked that it was a pretty good performance, then asked how they did it. The applicant replied, I don't know, it just happened. Story 32. An applicant had the same first name as I do, which is uncommon enough that I'm usually the only one in the company, and I put a strike against him because I didn't want him to have to deal with it. We already had 3 Steves and 3 Jeffs and the confusion that goes along with that, but at least they're used to it. Fortunately, he was also a poor technical fit for the role, but I can't deny the name wasn't a factor. Story 33. Sending a resume in doc format. Starting the email with Dear Hiring Manager, when my name is clearly stated on the job posting. Or even worse, Dear Sir, when my name is clearly that of a female's. There is nothing going through my head now photos. Actually, the presence of photos on a resume is an instant no for me. Crap formatting, awful font selection, and useless document labels like resume v and .doc. No. Story 34. I had a woman send me an application that was pretty decent until I got to the bottom and saw that she had written a paragraph about how she was convicted of a felony at one of her previous employers and how she had learned her lesson. In a way, I appreciated the honesty, but we don't do background checks, so it was unnecessary. My boss tore that resume up pretty quickly. Story 35. I really only dismiss off the bat based on lack of relevant experience, but everything else mentioned does color my perception of the candidate before speaking to them. The one that stands out was the guy that included his eBay account and feedback score on his resume for a position that was a very technical position. and had nothing to do with eBay, auctions, customer service, etc. Story 36. Not disregarded, but actually hired. Dude came to his interview with a snake DD around his neck. It was alive. Dude came to his interview in full juggalo makeup. Chick lisped her way through the interview because she forgot her teeth in the car. Manufacturing is fun. Story 37. One time I was watching my dad look through the emailed resumes applying for a job at his real estate company. He immediately deleted one without looking at it. When I asked why, he said, "It had flowers on it. I'm not looking for an artist." Story 38. My husband does some of the interviewing at the engineering company we both work for. The people we hire must represent us to our clients. That tattoo of the cool symbol, visible while you are dressed in your suit, I think it means don't hire me. Story 39. I was the hiring manager for almost 5 years for a medium-sized company. I would refuse to interview anyone if they showed up late, even if it was 15 seconds late. Show up early, at least 10 minutes. There's no excuse for being late to an interview. Story 40. I worked at Wendy's about 20 years ago, and our manager showed us an application where the kid used to work at a candy company, putting the cut pieces of fudge into boxes. He listed the occupation as fudge packer. She hired him. He probably still works there. Story 41. To all it takes to get the job is spell everything right and use a good font in anticipation of someone telling me there's more to it than that. Yes, I know there's more to it than that. Story 42. I had a guy tell me in an initial interview about his near-death experiences and the time he took a quiz about what kind of dog he'd be. A bulldog, for whatever that's worth. Did not call back for second interview. Story 43. By reading through this thread, I honestly can't understand how all of these points aren't common knowledge. No wonder I've gotten every job I've applied for. You're sending in your CVs on crayons with you teen-year-old email addresses. Story 44. Her resume was 12 pages long. Couldn't even finish reading it. Most of it was for the same jobs, but if she took any time off, she would just list it again when she started back up. Story 45. 4-page resumes. What the duck are those for? I hate anyone with anything over 2 pages. Also, if you apply for every position a company is offering, from a laborer to an engineer, you're a banana. Story 46. I was hiring for a receptionist position. On her resume, she had Subway listed as previous experience, but did not refer to herself as a sandwich artist. Story 47. Any application handed in by someone's mom, especially annoying if the child is with them. If you're old enough to have a job, then you should be old enough to speak for yourself. Story 48. I didn't do it, but one of my old bosses threw out an application because the person had wrote the Ohio State University instead of Ohio State University. He was a Chotch. Story 49. Any resume over 3 pages, especially if the majority of it is not relevant. I can't even read posts on here that have more than 2 paragraphs. Story 50. Decided to not hire an applicant whose email address was something like cookie378. Also, she referred to Africa as a country in an answer to some international issues question we asked. Employers of Reddit. What is the worst thing a potential employee can do or say in an interview? Story 1. Old hiring manager friend of mine had this gem. Candidate shows up on time, but smelling lightly of French fries. I hope you don't mind, but I didn't get to take a lunch break yet today, she said, opening a fast food bag. Then you'll be pleased to know that our lunchroom is down the hall on the left, and when you finish eating, you are free to go. This interview is over, and he left without another word. Story 2. Ask, is this interview going to take long? You should come prepared to be there at least an hour, even if it only lasts 10 minutes. If an interview ends up going longer, or if they want you to talk to others in the company, the person you are meeting with usually asks. Story 3. From the last time a similar thread was up, taking a parent to the interview. I'm not kidding. There were people whose mother decided to come along and come sit in on the interview. Story 4. I was hiring for a senior position paying somewhere in the region of $90K. Not a horrible salary, especially in the location I was hiring for. I wasn't hiring in the valley. I explained to the guy how the interview process will work. I then asked my first question. He says, "That's your first question?" I'm confused and reply with, yeah? Well, that's an odd first question. Most people want to know about the gap in my resume. Nope, don't care. Can you answer my question? The gap is there because I wrote a book. Okay, I wasn't concerned. Can we get back to my question? It was optioned for a movie. I'm shopping a second book around now. That doesn't apply to this role. Can you please answer my question? I had given up on hoping he'd be a fit by the second time I asked. Story 5. In my last job before I moved to Verizon, I did recruiting. The kid I was interviewing must have confused my Soilwork t-shirt and my tattoos as a sign of me being his best buddy and asked, "So, you ever bang any of the chicks here? Do they put out?" He winked and slapped my knee like we had known each other our whole lives. Story 6. I'm 22 and do recruiting occasionally. I've had people make comments such as, "How old are you anyway? Would I be working under you?" When will I be interviewed by the manager? Story 7. Me. What 3 words would you choose to describe yourself? Potential employee? Word 1, word 2. Huge pause. Like 80 freaking seconds of thinking. Decisiveness. Cue, loud eye roll. Story 8. Story time. I had an interview to work as a salesperson for a phone company. Interview is going super well. Getting along super friendly, have all the relevant experience, and he seems super impressed. At the end of the interview, he asks non-consequentially, "Oh, and will it be a problem for us to get a police clearance for you?" At this point, I was feeling very relaxed and confident and dropped the best line you can drop in an interview. "Yeah, that's fine. The cops haven't found the bodies in the backyard yet, so it should be squeaky clean." His face turned to a deadpan expression. I never heard back. Story 9. The other day, a girl answered the "tell me about yourself" question with, "My favorite color is purple. My best friend is Becky. I live with her." Nope. I love this question because it gets answered in so many ways. It can be a great personality indicator. It's also one of the most common interview questions, and when I see that people are totally blindsided by it, it indicates to me that they didn't prepare for the interview. We didn't hire her, not because of her weird answer, but because she typed about 10 WPM and couldn't spell very well. Story 10. Not anything really amazing, but some of the worst I've seen. 1. Interviewing for a contract programming position. One of my colleagues, near the end of the interview after we've asked a bunch of questions and the interviewee has asked a few, asks, "What do you think you could do for our team if we hired you?" He sat for a short while, pulled a and said, "I really don't know." He may as well have just said, "I have no idea what I'm good at, and I don't know anything about what you do here." 2. We had a really smart guy that answered all of our questions perfectly. Then at one point, I think we maybe asked him what one of his weaknesses was. He launched into this discussion about how he's really stubborn, and when he thinks he's right, he'll fight for it. Now, that's actually fine, but then he went on to imply that he had a job previously where a colleague disagreed with him but was wrong and crap hit the fan. No details, but the way he talked about it sounded like it came to fisticuffs. Can't hire a guy that's gonna punch one of us in the face if the team wants to override one of his decisions. 3. One lady came in for the position from a tech staffing company that just told us up front that she didn't have much experience with programming, but she's a good learner, and if she got the position, she'd go out right after and buy a book about the technology we were hiring for. The interview didn't last very long. Story 11. I do a small test in the phone interviews prior to group interviews. I tell them to make sure that they bring me a copy of their resume. Very small, menial task, but it's my first attempt to gauge, do they listen and follow orders? I've had people tell me that they didn't have the time to print, didn't have ink in their printer. Printer is dead. Wasn't sure why I asked for one, since they sent one in through Career Builder anyway. Which, of course, I have it. And a printer that can sort, stack, staple, but duck 50-page reports at the rate of 20 a minute 20 feet away from me. But I asked you to do something, and you didn't do it. You would have to move a small mountain to get me to even consider you for the position in the interview if you started out like that. Story 12. Had a cocky guy my age show up to a front-of-house server interview in a suit, then proceed to tell me that he didn't really want to be a server. He came to take my job. As a 25-year-old woman who was managing the restaurant and worked damn hard to get there, I wasn't impressed. I don't really think that kind of stuff works outside the movies. I thanked him for his time, and he rolled his eyes and huffed and walked off. Story 13. I was conducting a phone interview and asked what they disliked most about their last job. Answer: there were a lot of Mexicans working, and they just spoke Mexican to each other all the time. Pretty much stopped listening after that. I happen to be of Mexican descent. I should have ended the interview in Spanish. Story 14. I ask interviewees to describe a time when they failed at something and what they learned from it. 2 bits of general advice here. 1. Be prepared to discuss successes and failures. 2. Do not say or imply that you've never failed. It's a deal breaker. Seen some snark, so worth explaining more. I ask this question because I want to know a candidate is willing to push boundaries, is self-critical when things don't go well, and learns from the whole process, and is willing to share their lesson. It's about failing forward. It's definitely not about getting interviewees to self-incriminate. Also, whether you're running a Fortune 500 company or managing a till, there are always improvements to be made. Story 15. I had a male interviewee imply that football was for men and shopping was for women. You never make a sexist comment in an interview, especially if the boss is a female. In story 16, I don't have a weakness. A. You're lying, B. If you truthfully think you don't have a weakness, it means you are unaware of your actual weakness and can't work to improve them. Story 70 was part of a 2-person interview, me, male, and a female coworker interviewing a male candidate who said he had just arrived in town. He had worked for our restaurant at a location a few states away. He kept asking personal questions to the female interviewer. Where are you from, etc. After he asked her to a movie, we asked him to leave and informed him he would not get the position. Story 18. Software developer. It is extremely upsetting and disappointing to see a candidate who has software development experience listed on their resume, especially in a language equal to or similar to the languages we use in our company, who can't even write a simple function. Those people have no business including it on their resume when the basics escape them so badly. Story 19. Not the one conducting the interview, but I was observing to provide an opinion. She got a text message during the interview. She actually took out her phone, checked it, and replied while the interviewer was asking her a question. Story 20. Use the word stupid. It seems like a small thing, but it is an indication of a judgmental, self-centered person that can cause problems. Oh wait, worst thing. Bash former employers. It is rare to interview someone that can insightfully convey a former employer's flaws. Story 21. Not knowing anything about the company. When I ask you why you want the job, your answer is essentially you're hiring, making unsolicited political statements of any kind. I don't really care what your politics are, but if you are going to that forceful in an interview, you'll probably cause tension in the office, dressing inappropriately or being late to the interview. Tell me that your coworkers think you're a Karen and don't listen to you. When you are interviewing for a training position, say, "It's not my job to make people learn." Argue with one. On your interviewers when they tell you how you could improve your presentation. All of these have happened, and there are still more. It kind of amazes me how poorly some people behave in an interview. Story 22. Not an interviewer, but I was training a potential new employee. My company is building a group of people who are trained before a new program goes live. So I'm training this guy who the entire time is extremely loud, acting like he knows everything, and is constantly correcting my use of acronyms. So instead of saying FIBS, he says, "Oh, at my old job, it was fibs." As I'm trying to show him stuff, he is constantly texting, I'm chatting his wife, and eating. He does that for 2 days. Finally, I make his last day of training very difficult to see if he was actually paying attention. He needed constant help. Moral of the story, other people will be getting called first. Story 23. The worst one I ever had to deal with was showing 2 ladies who turned up for interviews together. Only one had been asked to come in. The second one had applied for the job, but hadn't been anywhere near suitable, so I hadn't booked her in. The bad part was when they both demanded that I interview the second one. Neither got the job, surprising. Second would be anyone who talks badly about their former employer. Show some confidentiality, people. It proves that I won't be able to trust that employee to keep company secrets to themselves and that they'd be likely to defame my company to others. Not something I'd want to invite. Story 24. Me. So why are you no longer working for your last employer? Them. Well, they cut my hours. Me. That's too bad. So you were generally working under 40 hours every week? Them. Well, no, but I can't pay my bills if I'm not getting at least 10 hours of overtime every check. And no thanks. Story 25. During interviews, my old boss liked to walk people around the area if he'd thought that they were going to make it to the next round of interviews. During one such interview, this kid, it was an apprentice position, pulled out his phone and was texting the whole time. Each time my boss would say something, he'd get a "uh-huh" or "yeah, K" as a response. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. So if you take your phone, put it on silent. I'm sure that text about Matt hooking up with Cheryl can wait until your interview is over. Story 26. Wearing jeans, flip-flops, or any other casual clothing. I do a good portion of the interviewing at my place, and I always am so disappointed when people dress like they're going to go hang out at the mall. While I do think that certain jeans can be dressed up, a job interview is not the place. Oh, and hoodies. Had someone try that one too. Really, just put some nice pants on, and maybe a nice top. I don't care who your favorite football team is, nor do I care about your acid-wash, destroyed look. Story 27. I see you didn't mention that job on your resume. Can you tell me more about your responsibilities there? Oh yeah, I was just too lazy to put it on there. And thank you for your time. Actually happened. I was how floored. Story 28. A guy I know asked simple coding puzzle to a dude who was interviewing for a senior-level job. It should have been a breeze for a well-qualified candidate. Instead, the dude asked the interviewer, "How would you solve the problem? Wouldn't you just use Google?" The interviewer responded, "Well, this is a coding puzzle. I'd like to see how you go about solving it." Dude responds, "I'd use Google to find the answer." To which the interviewer said, "Thank you. That's the last question we have for you today." Ballsy as duck, though. Story 29. I don't care if you know how to do something, but saying that you can't do something would be pretty bad. I want to hear people say, "I'll figure it out." Never, "I don't know how." Story 30. Overselling themselves. Bragging and talking about how great they are to the point of incredulity is almost always bullcrap stemming from insecurity and ignorance. Truly confident people don't talk themselves up. Truly confident people are assertive, direct, and often humble. The same goes for talking down on others, talking about how their last boss, co-workers were crap. and how incompetent they were. They often are either projecting or they misunderstood the situation and don't realize that they were the incompetent one. Story 31. Technically not an interview, but I witnessed a guy who'd been hired for the third shift and was going to be alone all night sit down across a desk from his new boss and ask whether there were any cameras on premises. Story 32. When the ad says submit resume in Word or PDF only, don't send it in another goddamn format I can't open. Also, at least take the time to tailor your resume a bit. A few years ago, I was looking for an admin assistant. I had a resume come through with the objective as to further my career in childcare. Though this place has a few babies working here, I don't need a full-time babysitter on staff. Pay attention to the goddamn ad. Story 33. Be mean, rude, or disrespectful to the receptionist or anyone else that you meet. Bring your chili, parent, spouse, or anyone else really, to sit in on the interview. Give me one-word answers to questions that are meant for you to speak at length. Check your phone during the interview. Smell like you just left a Fish concert. One time a guy showed up wearing flip-flops, a tank top, and swim trunks. This was not appropriate attire for a job not involving a pool or beach. Story 34. Me. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Them. Oh, I'd love to be insert my job title. Even if that's the case, folks, there are better ways of phrasing it. Story 35. Sat in on a talk at my university by someone who hires for Google. When they ask you to write some code to solve a problem on a whiteboard for them, if you go straight to writing the code without taking any time to think about the problem first and how you approach it, that is a deal breaker, he said. They want people who are thoughtful and think about how they do things rather than just going with it. Story 36. 1. Hiring for the opening shift at a gym. Does it matter if I have slept before I come to work? 2. Same gym, same position, different shift. I can make change, but it takes me a very long time. How long would I have to train? Because it might take me a few months to learn the register, but I am so desperate for a job I will do anything, even lick your feet. Hiring entry level was interesting. Story 37. I was doing an interview, but when I was asked if I had any question, I asked, how much will I be paid? He told me, you don't ask that as your first question. It was for a summer camp job also. I could go on about other things I said that I shouldn't had. Story 38. Have a ringback tone. I spent half my life on the phone, and no one will ever be able to convince me that listening to the crappy pop/country/whatever song that you have playing is better than the standard phone ringing noise. Also, if you're trying to convince me that you are hardworking, today I don't feel like doing anything, probably isn't your best choice of ringback tone. Story 39. Do not crap all over your current previous employers. Just say you learned a lot and realized you wanted to grow in a new direction. Otherwise, you're demonstrating you have no tact. You're bringing negativity into the interview, and you're forcing the interviewer to wonder, what will this person say about our company one day? Story 40. Was in a group interview where a guy answered his phone not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. Later in the same interview, we were all asked to describe a time we had done something and it didn't go as planned and how we reacted. One of the other interviewees replied, things never go wrong when I plan them. I am perfect. Story 41. Not me, but a former supervisor told me this one. A young woman was interviewing for a job as counselor at a Girl Scout camp. When my supervisor asked, how do you handle stressful situations? The woman buries her face in her hands, ran her fingers through her hair, and rubbed her eyes while groaning. My parole officer said you would ask me that. Story 42, Story 43. It is poor form to advise the interviewer of what you are unwilling to do, especially if it is well within reason for the position. You would be surprised at how many people advise me they're unwilling to work Saturdays for a weekend and evening position. Story 44. Oh, great, a list of reasons I still don't trust hiring managers. I ran an interview for my storeroom job, and this 19-year-old guy seemed to be doing fine until he mentioned that he's going to get knee surgery in a few days. This job almost exclusively involved lifting 50-pound boxes. Story 45. I thought I was decent at interviews. Now having read this thread and reacted with, oh, I totally do that, or that doesn't sound that bad, or but come on, asking such a question is dumb to begin with, to basically everything, I realize I'm terrible at interviews and will never again obtain employment. Damn. Story 46. Being rude or dismissive to one of the employees was a huge red flag for me. Don't treat the secretary like crap. I will find out. I used to hire for sales, and I would often send one of my salespersons over for chit-chat just to see what the response would be. Story 47. I used to hire people at Six Flags. When we asked what kind of job they were interested in, some would say, I really like working with money. We didn't hire them. Also, once a guy told me, it's been a really long time since I heard a kid. Did not hire him either. Story 48. If you are scheduled for an interview and you don't show up because you don't know how to get there, you may not reschedule. There's this magical thing called the internet that serves as both your personal cartographer and navigator when in doubt. Story 49. For me, a deal killer is when a candidate states that their long-term plans include quitting and starting their own competing business. Sure, lots of people want to do that, but to say that to me in an interview, you need to have some sort of filter. Story 50. I recently interviewed a guy who kept talking about his parents. Not helpful. I don't want to know what kinds of challenges your mom and dad faced in their careers. They're not the ones applying for this job. It sounds like you have no idea how to navigate the world on your own. Story 51. Me. What have you been doing while out of work? Candidate. Getting healthy? Me. So, like losing a couple lbs or candidate. Getting sober? Me. What's your vice? Candidate. I was pretty messed up on meth. Candidate had been out of the oil field for less than a month. We passed story 52. Definitely don't do what some dude did to me today, asking for work, which is over the span of 3 hours go from saying hi on Facebook to asking me on a date and then calling me a crazy Karen when I didn't respond. Definite no-no. Story 53. During one interview, the applicant told me and a colleague that at his last job, he particularly enjoyed exposing himself to his female coworkers at his former job. That was not a desired skill. So we ended the interview once we could collect ourselves. Story 54. I interviewed a guy where we ended up in a conversation about the merits of killing the escort after services had been rendered and reclaiming your money in GTA. He got the job. Story 55. I find that people who show up all screwed up looking do not work out. It's not a serious enough thing to get into a decent set of clothes or show up on time. Then you can expect them to work just like they interview. Employers of Reddit. What's the strangest thing you've ever had the displeasure of reading on a resume? Story 1. I have 2. I used to work at a locally owned coffee shop and I had a woman come in and make small talk. After a few minutes, she mentioned needing a job. I told her to fill out the application. She did, and as she was talking, she said, "If you get me this job, I will either blow you or give you a back rub. I give really good back rubs." I assumed this to mean she did not give good BJ. She was not hired. The second one was when I was working at a bank. We got a resume turned in that listed all the classes he took in high school as well as his grades in said classes and quotes from his instructor about his work in these classes. He was homeschooled. All of the quotes were from his mother. It was a 6-page resume. Story 2. While not the employer directly, I was tasked with assisting in the search for my replacement as entry-level network admin at my old job, which I was happy to do. So I got forwarded the resumes. This one guy had under his help desk skills, experienced in feeling pity on end users. He started the following Monday. Story 3. When my mom worked retail in high school, the employer she worked for hired a woman who came in with a case manager because she had been let out of prison after serving 4 years for murdering. All her resume contacts were rehabilitation counselors and even a cop. It turned out that the murder was in self-defense. My mom said she was actually a really nice girl and a good employee. Still, it would be pretty shocking to see serve time in prison for murder on an application. Story 4. I had one person highlight on their resume that they were experienced in email. Seriously, in today's tech world, that's like saying you know how to heat food in a microwave or flush a toilet. Why would you put that on your resume? Story 5. Full stack developer opening. We have a field that says, what makes you unique? One candidate put, I will stack the best boxes and full and complete stacks ever. I have won box stacking competitions at my current job in the UPS warehouse. I would love to develop your stacks. Story 6. I was trying to get my friend a job when we were in college at a restaurant I worked at. In primary language, he wrote English and music. My manager threw that right out. Story 7. I'm a restaurant manager, and I had one resume that detailed in 3 pages how he was a self-employed dishwasher. I'm pretty sure he was just listing his chores as experience. Story 8. I used to work at a small grocery store as a meat cutter. One day my boss comes in laughing about this application. This woman put down no prior felonies. When my boss did a background check, she printed off the record. It was like an inch thick, filled with substances charges, larceny, burglary, and escort. Booze to boss. Story 9. I have a great story for this, but I wouldn't call it displeasure. When I was a kid in high school, I worked at Burger King. I worked front register during the week after school, so if someone came in and wanted an application, I would be the one to give it to them and to accept it. Not my job to hire, though. The restaurant was at a major intersection, and one day I see a woman walking from up the road. As she gets closer, I can see that she had huge raccoon eyes. She had drawn black eyeliner and a 1 cm or so border around the top and bottom eyelids. She comes in, asks for an application, goes to a table to fill it out, and then turned it in to me. 95% of the application was filled out in 1s, 0s, and a few 2s. Name: Susan Smith. I don't remember her real name. Date of birth: 01100. Phone number: 011. Do you have transportation? My truck. Where has you worked before? 01110. It was weird as all duck. I showed my manager, who was like, hit that ducker, but I took it home to show my boyfriend, who worked at another restaurant down the road. She came in a few weeks later to his restaurant and did the same ducking thing. No, neither restaurant hired her. Story 10. Had a girl list her nickname as Tits. During the interview, she asked me to call her Tits instead of her real name. This was a retail position. Her tits were huge, though. Story 11. I've read hundreds of resumes, but the one line that will always stand out at me was not for my professional duties, but on the resume of a friend in college. After listing his experience, qualifications, references, etc., he decided to finish his resume off with one final and vaguely threatening line: "You will come to regret not hiring me." Story 12. Not in a resume, but an application. The question was, in your own words, what is the purpose of our business? Response: to take a break from the common miseries of civil society. For those who have been asking, it was an application for a large hardware store. Story 13. When I had just become a shift manager at a pizza shop that I used to work at, one of my first managerial tasks was to comb the stack of 100+ applications and resumes to try and hire a new delivery driver. We weren't in the best part of town, and we were right down the street from a high school filled with smart-ass kids and flunkies. I can't remember all of them, but here are some of the odd ones that I do remember. One applicant entered his name, then also wrote, "But my boys call me Buzzhawk." One applicant wrote, "Dropping out soon," in the education section. One resume listed such skills as MySpace and making people laugh. One person applied as Austin Powers. One girl actually got a job interview, and she actually got up to leave before the interview was over, saying that she didn't really want the job, but was hoping that guy back there, a coworker of mine, was going to be the one to conduct interviews because she just wanted to give him her number. Unfortunately for her, he was gay. One application put his height and weight on it, along with his 40-yard dash time. One applicant noted over 60,000 followers on Twitter and included his Twitter handle. Story 14. I wasn't the employer in this situation, but back when I worked for a little independent theater, we would meet some weird people applying. The area has a lot of gutter punks, so they would apply once in a while, and they were always fun. But this one time, a guy comes in, pretty normal looking, a bit of a hippie. He hands me his resume, then leaves. A few minutes later, my boss comes down from the office in tears and hands me his resume. Under skills, he wrote down that he could see in the dark, use force, bake, ride horses, and clap with one hand. Under education, he put Fresno, Oakland, Juilliard, and Harry Potter School. And the best was yet to come. At the very bottom, it had an asterisk that said, "Do use substances test." So we assumed he was ducking with it and threw it away. Then I ran into him on the street a week later, and he started asking me if we hired anyone and if we still were, and a bunch of crap. He genuinely seemed like he wanted that damn job. Wish we would have hired him? Place failed 3 months later? I think his dark room vision would have saved us. Story 15. Held an audition for a punk girl band, manufactured project. Girl bass player had pic on her CV of her naked, chugging a bottle of vodka and cuddling a huge beefsteak. Plus, she couldn't actually play her instrument in the slightest. Story 16. I have hired and fired so many in the technology industry. I love creative resumes that aren't overt, but are at least different enough. Do not really see too much bad stuff on tech resumes too often. But there is one thing that gets me each time. Using the word technologist anywhere on a resume for any technology-related field, including technology journalist. It tells me you know nothing, like literally nothing. I have hired self-taught noobs off the street for first-level support because they could show they could learn and had a good personality. Using the word technologist on your resume is not having a good personality in the technology industry. Instant trash bin for me. Story 17. Not as an employer, but I used to work in print and copy shops and have seen some great, terrible ones. My favorite was from a waitress-actress that had the following gems. Can drive a combine. Acted in play you've never heard of. Performed totally nude. Can drive manual transmission. Acted in other play you've never heard of and performed totally nude. Can French kiss with eyes open or closed. Wish I still had a copy. Story 18. During my first round of work in a coffee shop, we were hiring and my manager had me sort the resumes. So I took them and obviously looked through them. My manager put a question on the application that was attached to the resume. It wasn't so much the resume, but the answer to this question. So I peeked and saw this answer. What do you like best about coffee that would help you with selling coffee in the position you are applying for? We did a lot of whole bean coffee sales. I like coffee with a lot of cream and extra sugar. That was it. I'm sure she misread the question, but still. Story 19. I used to work for an employment agency, so would both help our clients with their resume and have a look at resumes that were an application for jobs we advertised, which was rare. Generally, the worst were from backpackers from overseas who don't seem to know what a resume is for and some were literally just a few sentences in a Word document. The worst I had handed to me to fix didn't have the applicant's name on it at all, nor a phone number. The other bad one was an older man whose resume was 10 pages, and he wouldn't let us reduce it down. He had put that he was a caravan repair technician because he was doing up an old caravan. He put boilermaker because he had done some welding, etc. I'm fairly sure he also claimed to be a mechanic and electrician. He was 60 years old and retired, so we didn't fight him too much on it. But he liked to come in for appointments just to chat. Story 20. I've probably looked at 1,000+ resumes over the years. I have read some doozies, but there's one that stands out in my mind. This guy sent me a resume for a quality technician job. It was 10 pages long, 9 full pages, front and back, detailing the usual education, skills, and experiences, along with a rambling manifesto of his philosophy on how he interacts with the universe. He used the phrase, being a handsome fellow, several times during his ravings. The 10th page was the clincher, though. It was a full, page-sized picture of himself, in full gym regalia, patterned workout pants, a la Rex Kwando. It was the 90s. Leather lifting belt, tiny tank, headband, and fingerless lifting gloves in the classic Arnold bicep flex pose. I originally thought, as our Brit friends say, he was just taking the piss, but he called several times to extol his virtues and ask when his interview was. I sincerely wish I still had the thing. It was a masterpiece. Story 21. Not exactly on his resume, but I looked him up online. I found his YouTube, which led to his Twitter, which led to his blog, which advocated stabbing people who support rival football team. We weren't going to hire him anyway, but it was a stark example of covering your tracks. Story 22. Hiring paratransit short bus drivers. Went to a social agency for a job fair. First guy talked for like 15 minutes about how he had hepatitis and was all ducked up. Could not get him to go away despite some intense hinting. Then came a graduate student whose resume was full of intense artistic productions in Italy, like Commedia dell'arte in Florence, Shakespeare, operas, etc. Decided to be real with him and explained that I wasn't going to pay 2 weeks of training wages so that he could quit the moment he found out it was tough, let alone if he found something that actually involved his interests or experience. Story 23. Not an employer, but I was at a center that teaches you job searching stuff for work, CV writing, interview workshops, that kind of thing. And one of the guys who worked there excitedly pops up with, "Ghost Chips, you're a graphic designer, right? Check this guy's resume out." This other graphic designer had on his resume 2-page spread on a semi-opacity wood texture background, red page borders, blue section borders, random alien art in one of the sections, stretched out guitar photo, 3 photos of his face in random places, his name in the center of the page, in Old English font, complete with drop shadow, and whole thing was in blue text. The paper was crinkled from the ink. Besides from his atrocious resume, he had a lot of employable skills and experience. Story 24. I'm a hiring manager at a delivery place. Had a driver applicant that was in his 60s with an 8-page resume that included engineering for NASA and at least 5 years of school. Overqualified much? Story 25. My brother, who was a lawyer trying to find a job, had a whole section of when he was his college mascot as past experience. It was like I was Manic Goat Man of University of Trump, name changed to protect the guilty, traveled with women's basketball team, spread team spirit, gave away prizes, attended pep rallies. After getting rid of this, finding a job became much easier. Story 26. Just mildly interesting, but still something to avoid on a resume. I was hiring a college intern, and 80% of her resume was about church, religion, mission trips, or politics. I'm not religious at all, and her political leanings were 100% contrary to mine. I hold that against potential employees not for disagreeing with me, but for making the mistake of centering a resume around an ideology in the first place. I'd consider that a lapse in judgment, even if the candidate agreed with me completely. Story 27. I'm not an employer, but something similar happened to me. I was applying for loads of jobs and continually getting rejected. I was confused as I thought my CV was pretty good. After a while, I finally read over my CV to see what was making me look so unemployable. Then I saw it. Bottom of page 2, under the skills section, I saw that I described myself as a world-class junk nibbler. My boyfriend at the time was to blame. I don't know how he knew that my junk nibbling skills were world-class. As far as I know, I never nibbled his junk. Story 28. I had a guy who applied for a job who had no work experience, and his accomplishments section was mostly filled up with different League of Legends accomplishments. Also, the levels to which he was able to achieve with different classes on World of Warcraft. Story 29. I've read it all. My favorites are the ones that mention saving people's lives. I read one pretty recently about how someone saved McDonald's several million a year by reducing condiment portions. He was 18 and worked at McDonald's for 2 months. Story 30. I've seen a lot of hilarious, terrible, and hilariously terrible resumes, but the one that stands out most was from a guy who included a letter of reference written from his cat. It went on about what a good roommate he was, and was signed with a paw print. I thought it was fantastic and wanted to get him an interview. But the person who would have been managing this position on a day-to-day basis didn't think it was as funny. Story 31. I used to get all kinds. I hate when people include an interests section, but that is just personal preference. Some of the garbage I remember seeing in there included breakdancing, hip-hop, and suits, as in the TV show. Story 32. Remember the advice that your resume should say, "Hey, look at me"? We actually got a resume from a recent college graduate for an entry-level management job, where she had written, "Hey, look at me," in red felt tip on the top. I'd always thought that it was figurative advice, but she took it literally, down to drawing eyelashes on the O's in look to make them look like eyes. To be fair, we did look at her resume, but only to giggle. Story 33. Under accomplishments and skills, it read, "During summer, I done long jumps and I also done hurdles. I like sports and being outside. That gives me a feeling of good accomplishment." This was an application for first, second line it. Story 34. I had a girl hand her resume and she was maybe 15 or so. Under her interests, she listed boys and shopping, and on the back page, she had a huge smiley face and the text, "You should hire me because I smile." Story 35. For an upper-level job, under education, graduated School of Business. Went on to misspell it a few more times. Things like, "I have good business sense," and "I will be a valuable part of your business." They were sure to mention that they had formal MS Office training and experience. Now for the strange part. It was an emailed CV in Word format, with red squiggles under each misspelled business. We spent a moment scratching our heads after that one.